Hey guys, welcome to the channel. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Ash swapped minds after winning Alola League? Part 1. Before starting, if you are interested in Pokemon fanfictions, you can consider subscribing this channel and like this video, that will help a lot. Now let's dive in. This story is the Mew Complex by Rylu. Here's a short summary. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and somehow Ash ends up switching minds with his younger self. Current Ash has just won the Alola League, while past Ash is fighting for survival within the Tree of Beginning. Swap those two and what do you get? A mess, that is what. Mew takes no responsibility of the outcome. Now let's get to the story. Mew was fading. Simply put, it was dying. The whole tree was dying, and so were all the Pokemon living alongside it. The brave Lucario, and the brave boy with the magnificent aura, they were dying, too. They were exhausting themselves trying to save it. In minutes it would be over, and at least one of them would sacrifice their life for everyone else. Mew knew it had to save them. It was a higher order, a command from the other gods that filled its head and made its will bend to their will. And there would be no objecting to that. Mew had to think fast. They needed someone stronger here. Someone who could take the strain of losing majority of their aura and still survive. Someone with a healthy, powerful spirit and the blessing of legendaries on their shoulders. Mew looked at the little boy in front of it. He had a lot of potential. He had already been through a lot, Mew could tell. Had survived more than a normal child ever should. But it wouldn't be enough, this time. If he were just a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, a little bit more enduring, then he could save the tree and himself. Yes, it had to be done. Pushing through the powerful aura surrounding it, Mew surged forward and grabbed the child's face between its paws. And the universe shifted. Now, Alola, there was a loud crash from the loft. Kukui raised his head from the morning paper and set his coffee cup down. He looked towards the loft, smiling to himself. There never was an uneventful day when living with Ash. He was about to go back to the paper. It was still raving about Ash's victory and about Kukui's masked royal identity. And it was funny, before he heard Ash mumbling something and he paused, frowning. Lucario, no, Lucario, Ash was yelling, panicked, frightened. Kukui stood up, coffee forgotten, everything forgotten, and quickly walked closer. Ash? He called, heart racing, are you okay up there? Silence followed, only filled with Pikachu's worried sounds. He called Ash's name again, but still, there was no answer. What happened? Muttered Ash's voice then. Where am I? Kukui's stomach dropped. That was worrying. I'm coming up there. He cautioned, slowly, gently. Ash, just stay where you are. He climbed the ladder and peeked over the top of it into the loft. Ash was sitting on the floor next to his sofa bed, his eyes wide and an unusually haggard look on his face. He turned his head to look at Kukui, frowning slightly. There was no recognition in his eyes. Who are you? He asked in a weak voice, and where's everybody else? Kukui's grip on the ladder was white-knuckled. Where's Lucario? Ash demanded, and he sounded increasingly anxious with each word. What about Mew? What happened to the tree? Where am I? Kukui climbed up to sit on the edge of the loft. His hands were shaking badly, and he slowly leaned towards Ash. Ash, you are at my home, in Alola. I'm Professor Kukui, your teacher. Don't you recognize me at all? Is this amnesia? Has he hit his head or something? But Ash wasn't really listening. He had lowered his gaze to stare at Pikachu, who had climbed onto his lap and was pawing at his stomach, calling his name. Ash brushed a tentative hand over the fur between its ears and it cooed back at him in a questioning tone. This isn't my Pikachu, he said quietly, and Pikachu let out a hurt sound, its cheeks sparkling. Ash frowned, rubbing a hand hard against his forehead. No, it is. Huh? Pikachu, what happened to you? Pikapi. It yelped, its little nails pulling on Ash's shirt. Slowly, Ash wrapped his arms around it, turning his head again to stare at Kukui. Did I teleport here? He asked suddenly, startling Kukui. He sounded much more relaxed already. Said Kukui blankly. He dug out his mobile and started typing on it with trembling fingers. He needed help. He needed Burnet. Come home SOS. He hit send just as Ash stood up, Pikachu still tightly wrapped up in his arms. I gotta go, he said. I gotta get back to the tree. He walked slowly towards Kukui. Kukui did not move, his gaze fixed at the kid he had housed and taken care of for over a year. The freshly declared Alola champion, even. "Where are you going?" he asked worriedly. "What tree?" Ash frowned. "You know, the tree of beginning. Which way is it?" Kukui blinked. "There's nothing called the tree of beginning here. Ash, where do you think you are right now? Is this a flashback? Is he reliving a memory?" Ash stopped right next to him, leaning forwards to look over the edge of the loft. He looked like he was considering jumping down. Kukui fought against an urge to grab his arm and hold him. Probably somewhere in Cameron Palace," replied Ash distractedly. "I guess Mew sent me somewhere away from the tree, so I'd be safe." Cameron Palace. It sounded vaguely familiar, but Kukui was still at a complete loss. "Mew sent you?" he asked, just to say something, just to keep Ash talking. "Hey, can you move a bit? So I can get down?" Ash spoke over him. "I really gotta go." Kukui moved, just slightly, so he covered even more of the exit space. "I can't, Ash. I think I'll need to take you to the hospital. You might be suffering from memory loss. Or something similar." Ash glared at him. It was a weird look on him, one Kukui had not seen aimed at him before. "I'm not suffering from anything," he huffed, annoyed. "I remember everything just fine. We were about to save Mew, 'cause it was gonna die. And if I don't get back soon, Lucario might." He gritted his teeth, pushing past Kukui. He gripped the railing with his right hand, and before Kukui could do anything to stop him, Ash jumped, surprisingly fluidly. He swung his body over the edge and dropped down. "Don't, Pika." He landed hard on the floor, staggered shortly and dropped down to his knees. "Ow, ow." He groaned, picking himself up from the floor and rubbing at his legs. He looked at his little companion still in his arms. "You okay, Pikachu?" "Pika," it muttered. It didn't let go of Ash's shoulder. Kukui quickly climbed down the ladder, trying to come up with a way to stop Ash that would require the least amount of physical force. "Hey, wait up," he called, just as Ash's hand touched the doorknob. "You wanted to see Lucario, right?" Ash turned around, looking at him suspiciously. "Yeah, so?" Kukui fingered his belt, debating whether it was a good idea or not, if it would help Ash or just make this, whatever this was, worse. But Ash was looking like he was about to bolt out of the door any second, and Kukui needed to play time until help arrived. "Come out, Lucario," he called, releasing his longtime companion. Ash had seen his Lucario during the league, so maybe, just maybe, it would help him remember. But as Lucario appeared in front of him, the reaction was not what Kukui had expected. Ash stumbled back, his back hitting the door, and he stared at the Pokémon in shock. All color drained from his face, and Kukui could see a violent shiver running through his body. Lucario," he whispered. "Why is it?" Then, suddenly, his expression changed again. He looked away from Lucario, straight at Kukui. "That's not Lucario," he said angrily. This isn't my Pikachu. You're not. I've never seen you before. Is this some sort of trick?" He grabbed the door handle again, and with his other hand he pried Pikachu off his shoulder. It was frozen, stricken by the harsh words, and Ash managed to grab it by the fur of its neck and drop it on the floor. "I get it now. You're trying to fool me. Are you, Team Rocket? Team Magma?" he continued accusingly, while Kukui stared at him in complete shock. "Anyway, don't try to stop me. I'll save you, whatever it takes." He pulled open the front door and ran out. "Oh shit, oh shit. Wait!" Kukui yelled, finally getting his voice back, totally beside himself. "Ash, don't leave." He followed Ash, but he stopped short at the threshold, his heart in his throat. Because Ash was standing only a few steps away from the house, looking around the landscape with a blank expression. Slowly, he turned around and looked back at Kukui. "What is this place?" he asked softly. He looked like a trapped animal, even though there was nothing but space around him. "I guess you weren't lying about all this. Where am I?" Kukui's heart broke a little bit. Pikachu ran down the steps and latched onto Ash's pant leg, chirping angrily. Ash didn't shake it off this time. "I told you," Kukui replied quietly. "This is Alola. You live here." Ash blinked, confusion clear on his face. He still seemed wary about Kukui, about everything, but at least he had calmed down slightly. "Alola?" he asked blankly, hugging his arms around himself. "Where's that? I was just in Kanto." Kukui worried his lip. "Would you come back inside?" he suggested then. "We should talk about this, properly." For a moment, Ash just looked lost. Then, he glanced down at Pikachu, and something shifted in his expression. He bent down and gently picked up the Pokémon, holding it at arm's length. Pikachu stared at him with big eyes, whining softly. "You are my Pikachu," Ash muttered, a slight smile appearing on his lips. "You're just a bit different. I'm so sorry I said all that stuff to you." "Pikachu Pika Pikapi," replied Pikachu, and Kukui thought it sounded almost offended. Ash laughed softly, and he let Pikachu clamber onto his shoulder again. When he looked back at Kukui then, there was new determination in his eyes. "Okay, let's talk." Then, Kanto there was no warning, nothing to prepare him for it. It was an early morning, 2 days after his league victory, and Ash woke up to the comforting aroma of coffee and Kukui's soft humming coming from downstairs. The sky was bright blue behind the skylight window and Ash couldn't wait to go for a morning swim with his Pokémon. Smiling, he sat up on his sofa while Pikachu skittered over his legs with bounding enthusiasm. He was about to stand up when he was hit by an abrupt wave of vertigo that made him feel like he was falling backwards. His stomach dropped and the world around him blurred and spun and he blinked, startled. And in that moment, he wasn't in Alola anymore. He recognized the scene instantly. He was inside the Tree of Beginning, sitting slumped on the floor with Sir Aaron's gloves on his hands, and Lucario was about to die. Ash didn't care if it was a dream, or a vision, or a memory. He wouldn't hesitate this time. He scrambled up, jumped forwards and pushed Lucario to the side. Its telepathic voice instantly filled his head. "What are you doing, Ash? You will die." "No, you will," yelled Ash, throwing his hands at Mew and focusing his aura towards the dying mythical. It felt like a lifetime since he had last done this, but it felt like second nature at the same time, like welcoming back an old friend. A friend he thought he had left behind, a long time ago. His aura flowed through his fingers, and he felt a lot stronger than he remembered ever feeling. He could hear Pikachu calling his name, Kid calling his name, Lucario, yelling, desperate. His life force was draining, transferring into Mew, and he let it all go. Painful shockwaves ran through his body. His legs grew weak, and the world turned hazy around him, but he kept going, nonetheless. He would give Mew every bit of his energy if it meant that it would survive, and Lucario would live, this time. And then, finally, the chamber was lit by a green glow, and Mew was back. It flew over to the injured tree, transferring the healing energy into it. Before their eyes, the world changed, and life was released back into the place. Ash dropped onto his knees and pulled off the gloves, his hands trembling so badly even that simple task felt difficult. His arms were pale and gray-tinted under them, almost transparent, and he tried to remember what had happened next, all that time ago. "Ash, are you okay?" yelled Kid, leaning down to look at him. Ash didn't have the breath to answer her. "Pikapi," called Pikachu, and it ran up to him and stared at him with wide eyes. It had already seen him die once that day, remembered Ash, and now it might be happening again. "It's okay," he whispered hoarsely, fighting against the waves of pain, against the overwhelming dizziness. "Mew is safe. Lucario will. Lucario can finally live, now." "What did you do, Ash?" demanded Lucario, horrified. It grabbed his shoulders, shaking him harshly. "Why did you push me aside?" "You would have died," wheezed Ash. "I know, I'm from the future." What do you mean by that, Ash?" Kid shouted. "Stay with me." "Pikaka?" asked Pikachu, pausing its fussing for a moment. "The future?" Ash grinned wearily while Lucario helped him sit down against a big glowing rock. "Yep," he breathed. "I mean, this seems pretty real at least." "Hey, just try to rest for a moment," Kid exclaimed, crouching down next to him. "This is very real, Ash. And you're doing just fine, I promise you." Ash leaned his head against the rock, breathing out deeply. His head lolled to the side, and he spotted a time flower close by. He knew there would be a memory for Lucario to see. He reached out his hand, and with his touch the surroundings turned misty, and they could see Sir Aaron, all alone in that very chamber, his last minutes rapidly ticking to an end. Lucario, forgive me, please understand, I had to seal you inside the staff. I knew if I didn't, you'd follow me here and suffer the same fate. I only wish you could have known the real story. Lucario was near tears. It leaned towards the projection, trying to reach it. I understand. One day you will be released, in a distant and a more peaceful time. What will it be like? I wonder. I have no regrets. My journey has been good. I served a beautiful queen and you and I shared many adventures. Those memories will always be with me. Master, Lucario answered, tears flowing freely now, if you can only hear me, I want to tell you how much you mean to me. Lucario, farewell. You are more to me than just my student. You are my closest friend. Lucario nodded softly. I feel the same, who knows, it could be, one day, we will see each other again. I hope so, my friend. Aaron smiled for the last time, and then the image faded. Lucario was openly crying now, and it broke Ash's heart once again. Aaron, my friend. I'm sorry I failed you. Ash grabbed its hand, staring at it intently through his squinted eyes. That's not true, he stressed, struggling to keep his voice steady. He remembered the words he used to console Lucario the last time. You did all you could. You proved you're a true guardian of Aura, like Sir Aaron. Lucario lowered its head. Thank you, Ash, but now you are dying in my stead. I am so sorry. Ash smiled, relaxing against the rock. Don't be. I don't think I'll die right now. Pikachu crawled onto his lap, and Ash cradled its head gently between his hands. I would have been glad to go, Lucario continued, but I am truly thankful, Ash. You gave me a chance to see the world, like Aaron wished I would. Ash coughed, breath rattling in his chest. Mew. Help him. Kid demanded desperately, somewhere out of Ash's line of sight. Look at him, can't you do anything? Don't mention it, Lucario, Ash chuckled, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, Mew was hovering in front of him, a curious look on its face. Ash whispered. Mew. Mew. It responded softly. It reached out to him, but Ash jerked back, shaking his head. No, he objected quickly. Mew, don't, you're still weak, I'll be fine. Pikaka, said Pikachu from Ash's lap, glaring up at Mew. Pikachu Pika. Mew twirled around slowly, its tail twitching anxiously. Mew me. Did you send me here from the future? Asked Ash, staring at his gloved hands. He hadn't worn those gloves since, a long time ago. His body felt smaller too, weaker. Mew had done something to him. Mew stopped hovering, settling down to sit on the floor, eyes wide and strained. Ash's fingers were still tingling with traces of pain, but color was slowly returning to his skin, and he found he could breathe a little easier. The fatigue, however, was overwhelming, and he struggled to stay alert. If he fell asleep, would he wake up in his own body? How do I get back? Ash asked Mew, petting Pikachu distractedly. Can I get back? Next to him, Kid was talking through her wireless equipment, giving someone a report of the situation. Ash had barely heard a word of it, but he noticed when she stopped talking and turned around to stare at him once again. Wait, are you being serious about this, Ash? She asked, hurriedly dropping her call. Mew sent you from the future? It replaced your mind, your spirit, with your older self? I mean, your younger self? Whatever, can it really do that? Ash shrugged, smiling slightly. I guess so. I was in Alola just now, before I appeared here. I think my time is at least, a couple of years from now. Pikachu tilted its head and jumped off his lap. It looked at him carefully, suspicion in its eyes now that he wasn't actively dying. Pika? Did your other self go to the future, then? Questioned Lucario, totally confused. This seems strange. Ash rubbed the back of his head, embarrassed for some reason. It's not really as strange as you'd think. He sighed then. What a hassle. He was having such a good time and everything. He had just won the league, for Arceus's sake. Couldn't he have more than 2 days to enjoy it? Mew explained something to Pikachu and Lucario nodded. Mew says it indeed did swap you with your other self, because otherwise someone would have died. It can swap you back later, but it is too tired to do it right now. Ash scratched his hair. But how come I remember someone dying? If this is the past, then this This all should have already happened to me before, right? Mew, mew mew mew. Mew tells you to not think about it too hard, Lucario translated. Then it frowned, indignant. But that was a valid question, Mew. We should search for Brock and the others, suggested Kid, interrupting Mew's snarky reply. They must be getting really worried about us. I guess you're right, said Ash, still a bit perplexed. Then he grinned, excited. Man, I can't wait to see May and Max again, it's been so long. He pushed against the rock to stand up but was instantly thrown off his feet again. The world shook, and the roof of the chamber above them caved in with a thundering crash. A giant aircraft followed the crash, landing harshly on the cave floor. What's going on? Yelled Kid, stepping closer to Ash. Pikachu's cheeks sparkled, and it crouched nearby, ready to attack. Lucario, still exhausted, inched closer to the group. The aircraft's door opened, revealing a cluster of grunts. They didn't spend any time messing around, instead rushing forward with a clear plan and surrounded their small group effectively. One of them shot a capture beam at Mew that turned it into a stone-like statue, zapping its power away from it. Ash pushed himself up, his entire body shaking with exhaustion and anger. Hey, stop it! Kid shouted at the grunts. What are you doing? You can't do that to Mew. Pika Pika Pikachu Pika. Stop it, do not harm Mew. Ash was the only one silent, his eyes fixed on the aircraft with a mix of fear and rage on his face. More precisely, he was looking at the person standing at the threshold of the aircraft. He glanced around, feeling an intense sense of dread pooling in his stomach. He grabbed Kid's arm, speaking quickly under his breath. Kid, careful, she's Hunter J. Kukui called back Lucario, just in case, and beckoned Ash to come with him. Ash followed Kukui back into the house. He sat down on the very edge of the sofa, and Kukui went into the kitchen to get a glass of water for him. When he walked back, he saw Ash with his head bowed, running a gentle finger over the Z-ring on his wrist. Pikachu was halfway on his lap, ears twitching nervously. Do you know what that is? Kukui asked softly. Ash raised his eyes and shook his head. No idea, it's kinda cool, though. Kukui chuckled. At least the enthusiasm was the same. Oh, it is, he replied. It's a Z-ring, a special equipment for Pokemon battling, most commonly used here in Alola. When'd I get it? Ash asked, curious. He brushed a hand down his shirt, frowning slightly. When'd I get into these clothes? Kukui didn't have any answers. What did you think you were wearing, then? He asked instead, setting the cup down on the sofa table. Ash shrugged. You know, just my normal clothes. My hoodie and jeans. He looked at his bare hands again, and my gloves. He frowned deeper, an anxious look passing on his face. Actually, I was wearing Sir Aaron's gloves. Pika, do you have a mirror? Ash asked suddenly. Kukui nodded, pointing towards the bathroom near the corner of the room. He watched silently as the boy walked into the bathroom, turned on the light and leaned against the sink to stare at his reflection. He had an almost comical look of confusion on his face, and he ran a searching hand through his hair. I do look a bit different, Ash eventually said, thoughtfully, almost like he was trying to convince himself of something. My hair is kinda weird. He poked at his cheekbones. I don't think my skin was this tan, and... He turned to look at Pikachu, who had planted itself on his shoulder. Do you think I look a bit older, Pikachu? Pikachu tilted its head. Pika? It leaned over and peeked into Ash's ear, scrutinizing, like it thought it could check if his brain was still in there. If I look different, mumbled Ash, not noticing this or just not caring, then it means I didn't teleport here. Mew must have done something weird. He turned back to Kukui. Hey, have you got a video phone? Kukui was once again taken aback by the sudden change in topic. Yeah, I do, he replied numbly, waving a hand. But I really wanted to talk to you about. Suddenly, the front door slammed open, and Burnett stormed in like there was a hurricane at her back. Kukui! Ash, she yelled, before stopping in her tracks as she took note of them standing in the living room. Her eyes were wide, baffled. You're okay? Ah, damn, thought Kukui. She must have been worried sick after the message he sent earlier. We're okay, Burnett, he sighed, glancing at Ash, more or less. Her whole body deflated, and in few quick steps she was standing inches away from Kukui's face. "You asshole, answer your phone," she shouted, teary-eyed. "I tried to call you 10 times. I thought you were in serious trouble." Kukui took hold of her face, gently, and kissed her on the cheek. "Listen, Burnett," he whispered, and she calmed down instantly. "There's something wrong with Ash." Burnett stilled, turning to look at Ash, who was still standing on the bathroom doorway, looking at her curiously. Burnett stepped away from Kukui, leaning down slightly with a soft smile. "Ash, honey. What's wrong?" Ash scratched the side of his head. Pikachu was now poking at his ear, and Ash pushed it away absent-mindedly with the same hand. "Who are you?" Burnett jerked back like she had been slapped, color washing away from her face. She pressed a hand against her mouth and Kukui grimaced. He snaked his arm around Burnett's, hoping to give her some consolation. "Ash, this is Professor Burnett. She's my wife." Ash nodded politely. "Nice to meet you, I'm Ash." He turned back to Kukui, and Burnett let out a small broken sound behind her hand. "So, Professor, Mr. Professor? Can I use your phone?" Burnett, with a badly concealed look of dread on her face, caught Kukui's eye. He shook his head minutely at her before turning back to Ash and shrugging pointedly. "I guess you can. Who would you like to call?" Ash grinned. "Brock. He'll know what the heck is going on." "Oh, I really hope so," Kukui mouthed at Burnett. She also opened her mouth, closed it after a second, and turned back to worriedly stare at Ash. "All right," Kukui then said to Ash. "Follow me." He showed Ash to the phone and waited. Ash stood by it for a minute, just staring at it, brow furrowing with thought. Eventually, he threw his hands up in frustration. "Oh man. I dunno where to call. If he's at the tree, there won't be any phones nearby." Not even bothering to react to that, Kukui stepped up and planted a contact book on the desk in front of him. He pointed at the number Brock had left them during his last visit. "Look, here's Brock's current number. He visited you just few months ago. You two also talked on the phone yesterday about your league victory." Ash turned around, his eyes as wide as plates. "My what?" Kukui wanted to slap himself. What a way to tell the big news to the possibly amnesiac kid. But, well, what was done was done. "That's right, Ash," he said, gentler now. 2 days ago, after many difficult and wonderful battles, you became the first champion of Alola." Ash blinked. Then he blinked again. "No way," he yelped. "Really? Oh man, and I don't even remember that. Can you believe it, Pikachu?" Pikachu looked at him through squinted eyes. Ash paused, frowning. "Wait, if I'm in the future or something, then I don't want to know anything." He pointed at Kukui, vibrating from head to toe. "Alolan Professor, don't tell me anything, I want it to be a surprise." Kukui stuttered. "Oh okay. Ooh, I wonder what Pokemon I got in my team." Ash continued, stars in his eyes, before shaking his head again, glaring at Kukui. "No, don't tell me." He crossed his arms, pouting. "Okay. I'll call Brock, and hopefully this all will be sorted by then." He copied Brock's number from the book without any further fuss and waited patiently for the call to connect. Taking the chance, Burnett stepped in front of Kukui and made her most demanding, "What the fuck?" face at him. Kukui shrugged again, really hoping he had any answers. "Memory loss?" he whispered. "Possibly time travel?" Burnett's eyebrow twitched. Brock's voice got their attention then. "Oh, hey Ash, what's up?" "Brock!" exclaimed Ash. "You won't believe this, I think I time traveled, but not with my body. I was just in Kanto. You know that place where we met Sir Aaron's Lucario? The city with the big tree?" Brock nodded slowly. "Yuha, the Cameron Palace and the Tree of Beginning." "Yep. I was there, and we were just about to save Mew with Lucario, but the bam, I was here. But it's not like when Celebi sends you to another time. It wasn't like teleporting either. I look different, right? Older, but I'm sure I'm not going crazy or anything. The last thing I remember is Mew touching me." Kukui studied Brock's expressions. What Ash was saying sounded insane, just absolutely ridiculous, but Brock nodded along like he found nothing particularly strange about the words. "Mew sent you through time?" Brock asked, his brow furrowing. "That's unusual. It's not really known for that kind of power." That was it. Kukui couldn't take it any longer. "I'm sorry," he said, leaning into Ash's space to get on the camera. Hi Brock. Can I just ask this? You believe this is true? That Ash's mind got replaced by his younger self? Wait, how long ago did these events happen to you, Brock?" Brock shrugged, smiling. "Time is a bit of a hard concept, Professor. But I think it's been at least a couple of years since then." "What? What does that mean? What do you mean?" cried Kukui desperately. "And don't you remember what happened? Did Ash time travel or?" Brock frowned, more seriously now. "I don't really remember what happened, exactly. I remember us getting to the tree, and the tree being sick, but after that my memory is pretty much gone. Next thing I properly remember is us wandering around in Kanto, trying to find the battle factory for Ash's Battle Frontier challenge." Pikachu jumped on the table, leaning close towards the camera in a way that must have blocked anything else from Brock's view. Ash giggled and picked it up to put it back onto his shoulder, out of the way. "So, do you think Ash might be right about this?" Kukui asked hesitantly, after he managed to make eye contact with Brock again. Brock nodded, glancing warmly towards Ash. "Yes, I think him time traveling is more probable than him having a mental breakdown, if that's what you're asking." As weird as his words were as it came to comfort, Kukui still felt immensely relieved. He shared a pointed look with Burnett. She peeked behind his and Ash's shoulders, waving quickly at Brock. "Hi Brock. Anyway, what do we do now? Can we let this, Ash, wander around? Do you know if something might go wrong?" "Hey," yelled Ash indignantly. "You don't get to decide. I can take care of myself anyway." Brock sighed. It's pointless trying to keep him in one place. Just watch his back, try to stop him from doing anything the current Ash wouldn't do. Which isn't that much, to be honest. He smiled at Pikachu. "And Pikachu, even if it's been a while, this is still your Ash. Take care of him, alright?" Pikachu nodded solemnly. "Pikachu Pika. Come on, Brock," whined Ash. "I'm not a baby, didn't you hear I won the league?" Brock laughed. "Yuha, the Orange League. Great job with that." Kukui raised his eyebrows. He didn't know about that. "I don't mean that," yelped Ash. "I meant man, I guess I haven't won the Alola one yet." Burnett put a gentle hand on Ash's shoulder, calming him down slightly. "So, Brock," she said, "can we expect things to go back to normal on their own? If this is Mew's doing, will it return Ash back to his own time eventually?" "I'd think so, yes," Brock replied. "There's probably something going on in the past that required current Ash's help. That's just how it usually goes." He sighs with some humor, tilting his chin. "When that's done, and the world is saved, everything should get back to as it was." Kukui and Burnett looked at each other, and then at Ash. Ash put his hands behind his head, stretching his back nonchalantly. "Man," he breathed. "Fine. I guess I'll just wait here, then. Thanks Brock." "No problem. Take care now." They disconnected the call before Kukui or Burnett could get another word in, and the room was left in a heavy silence. Then, Kanto Kid stared at Ash, her face paling rapidly. "Hunter J? That Hunter J?" she asked, and Ash nodded numbly. "Yes, that Hunter J," said the person in question, smiling smugly. She gazed curiously at Ash from her vantage point. "I'm impressed you recognized me, Brett. My face isn't that known, not like my name is." Ash glared at her with his hands balled into fists, "Like I would forget you." She had gotten between him and his Pokemon way too many times during his time in Sinnoh. He had almost died or gotten hurt so many times because of her and her cruel plans. And then during the battle against Team Galactic, her ship had been destroyed, and she had never been seen again. But Sinnoh would be only after Battle Frontier, after all this, thought Ash. So she didn't know him, not yet. And as it was, Hunter J laughed condescendingly. "Oh, did I steal one of your precious Pokemon, little one? Must have been a while back, since I have no recollection of you. Do you still cry to your mommy about it?" While she talked, one of her goons sent out a disc that trapped the petrified Mew into a glass container. It was then lifted into the air and transported back towards the aircraft. "What did you do to Mew?" cried Kid, stepping forward, her hand reaching for her Pokeballs. "Stop that. Let it go." "Kid, said Ash, a warning in his voice. Pikachu was at his feet, back bent and eyes as thin slits, and Ash waved his hand towards it, silently telling it to hold on. But Ash, Kid exclaimed. We can't let them take Mew. If something happens to it, the tree will die. I know that, barked Ash. This tree and Mew are Simba, IOTIC creatures, I remember that. But she's super strong, Kid, and she captures Pokemon for money. If we're not careful, she might. He stopped himself before he could say anything else. Hunter J laughed loudly. Well, brat, you're not as stupid as you look, are you? She said to Ash. In fact, I only did come here for Mew, but just looking around now I can spot some remarkably interesting Pokemon with you. Your Pikachu for instance, and that Lucario. Ash stepped in front of Lucario, whispering hastily, don't say anything, she can't know. Lucario nodded sharply. She can't know that Lucario can speak telepathically. That Lucario is the Lucario from a 1,000-year-old legend. How did you know that Mew was here? Demanded Kid, turning Jay's attention to her. Ah, Kid Summers, she said with amusement. I didn't get the change to thank you yet. You see, I've been following you for a while now. Listening in as you spew all the secrets you come across to that commander of yours. Kid's face paled, her eyes widening in horror. Seeing this, Hunter J smirked. So, when I heard you mentioning that you had found Mew, well, I couldn't just let that go. One of my longtime clients has been asking for a Mew for years now. But it's quite the difficult one to find, don't you agree? You have a wiretap in our system? Kid asked hoarsely. Ash could see the devastation on her face as she looked past Jay, into the aircraft where Mew had now disappeared into. Soon, we don't, smiled Hunter J. You better take those glasses off your face, or you might get zapped. Without delay, Kid grabbed her glasses and pried them off. Not even a second later, an electric current ran through them, and Kid was forced to let go, yelping in pain. The glasses fell to the ground, charred black. She snarled. Hunter J shrugged. We won't be needing your assistance anymore, Summers. Now, there has been some interesting stories regarding this place, and all of them mention a Lucario. She turned to her goons and pointed at Lucario, still covering behind Ash's back. Let's take that one with us too. Ash could see her Ariados appear behind her, and he instantly knew what was about to happen. He yelled. Kid, get away, just as Hunter J commanded. String shot, Ariados. Ash grabbed Lucario's arm and dived to the side. The string missed him by a hair, and he landed hard on the floor, elbows scraping against the rock. Lucario landed next to him, and he pushed it up ahead of him. Run, he shouted. Lucario, run, you can't fight against her beam. He scrambled up, searching desperately for Kid and Pikachu. He spotted Kid leaning against the crystal rock, struggling against a string that tied her to it. Pikachu was still facing Jay, its cheeks sparkling with anger. Pikachu, no, Ash cried. Run away. One of the goons tried to grab him but he ducked under his arm and sprinted across the room. Lucario was nowhere to be seen, and when he got a moment to look around, he spotted Hunter J still standing on the aircraft steps, pointing her device all over the cavern in search of it. Pikachu, Ash yelled again. He didn't see it anywhere, didn't hear it anywhere. 3 men were running towards him, and he dashed away, heart in his throat. Pikachu. He was desperate now. Where was it? Where was Lucario? Was he all alone? Pikachu. Heads up, Ash, he heard Kid call, and he avoided another string shot just in time. He rolled across the floor and scrambled behind one of the crystal pillars for cover. He was breathing hard, chest tight and painful and hands trembling. He felt woozy. The room swam around him, and he rubbed his hands hard across his face. His palms stung afterwards, and he stared at his tattered, stained gloves with a disconnected feeling. He had no recollection of hurting himself. Like through a haze, he heard Hunter J say, "Forget about the kid, let's just take the rodent and search for the Lucario elsewhere." Ash's stomach dropped. Pikachu. Pikachu. He jumped up and looked towards the voices, just in time to see few of the goons closing in on a small, petrified figure on the floor. His body was numb, cold with fear, and his head drained of any sensible thought. The only thing he could focus on was Pikachu. No, stop, he screamed, sprinting towards Pikachu's frozen form. He pushed his way past the goons, leaping over Pikachu just as one of the men flung out a container to capture it. The flying device hit him hard on the small of his back, and he curled around Pikachu on the floor, groaning. "Get out of the way, brat," snapped Jay, and Ash got some satisfaction from hearing how annoyed she sounded. He got up again, his arms tightly wrapped around his little friend. "You won't get Pikachu," he shot back angrily. He started backing off, ready to dash. If they wanted Pikachu, they would have to take him too. "Drapion," called Jay, releasing a Pokeball, and the large Pokémon appeared in front of her. "Poison Sting." Ash yelped, jumping away. He managed to barely avoid the poison needles, and he ducked his head between his shoulders and darted off. He didn't quite reach the cavern entrance. Something hit him between the shoulder blades, and he was thrown off his feet, landing shoulder first on the ground and sliding ahead with the momentum. He groaned, squeezing Pikachu's form tightly against his chest, protecting it with his body. "Not letting go. Never letting go. Give up already," snarled Jay. "Drapion, grab them." Ash rolled onto his back and saw Drapion's looming form standing over him. Its claws rose, ready to strike. And that's when a blue ball of energy, of aura, Ash realized, struck it right on its head and it fell backwards with a loud screech. Ash rolled onto his knees and saw Lucario. He gasped. It had come back. It stood at the cavern entrance, fury in its eyes, and it prepared another aura sphere between its paws. Ash crawled towards it, breathing hard, pearls of sweat stinging his eyes. His hair plastered against his forehead, his hat was gone, lost somewhere at some point. Lucario's sphere hit Drapion again, pushing it even farther away from Ash and Pikachu. "Lucario," panted Ash. "You were supposed to go." Lucario didn't answer him. Instead, it leapt over his kneeling form and attacked Drapion with an aggressive move that reminded Ash of close combat. Drapion hissed in pain and it tried to cover itself under its claws with not much luck. Lucario attacked it ruthlessly, not giving it even a second to counter its attacks, and it was winning, fast. Lucario was strong, noted Ash with some awe, really strong. "Drapion, return," ordered Jay coldly, and to everyone's shock she called back the Pokémon, leaving Lucario to fight at nothing. It was left standing in the middle of the big space, and Ash knew it was too late. They had lost. Hunter Jay calmly raised her arm, aimed her weapon at Lucario, and turned it into stone. Ash didn't even have the strength to shout anymore. His mouth opened, his hand reached towards Lucario, but no sound came out. He sat back on his heels and watched numbly as the goons sealed Lucario into a container and transported it towards the airship. "What about the Pikachu?" asked one of the men, waving his hand towards Ash. "I don't think that boy's gonna be much of a problem any longer." "Ah, forget them," said Jay dismissively. "We got what we came here for, and I think I heard someone approaching. Let's leave before there's any more needless hindrances to our mission." "You cowards!" screamed Kid from the crystal rock where she was still bound to. Ash couldn't see her from where he was, but he was happy to hear her voice, to know that he wasn't completely alone. "How dare you do this, and for what? For money," Kid continued, her voice seething with anger. "You're truly the lowest of the low, Hunter Jay." "Oh, shut up," said Jay pleasantly. She stood at the threshold of her ship as the doors began to close. "Now, goodbye, Summers. We'll never see each other again." The doors slammed shut, and the sound reverberated around the cavern with a suffocating finality, sealing their fate. Ash took Pikachu's petrified form between his palms and looked down at it, tears burning in the corners of his eyes. Why was he here? Why was he here when he couldn't even protect his best friend? The engines of Hunter Jay's ship turned on, and through the deafening noise Ash could suddenly hear someone shouting his name. "Ash! Ash! You here? Ash! Kid! Everyone!" Ash raised his head, blinking. That was Brock and May. "In here!" yelled Kid, somewhat rousing Ash from his stupor. "Hurry up!" And then, their group of friends rounded the corner and arrived at the cavern. It was surreal, seeing Brock and May and Max, exactly as they had been years ago. Ash was closest to the entrance, and they stopped few meters away from him and looked at him with concern. "Ash, you Oka," started Brock, before he really saw him and flinched. Is that Pikachu?" Seeing his friends awakened something in Ash, Some last pocket of strength he didn't know he had anymore. He stood up again, took a few steps and handed Pikachu to Brock. Too stunned to resist, the young man took it in his arms, gently, worriedly. "Take care of it, okay?" Ash said softly. "What?" Ash turned to May and Max. "Hi guys, nice to see you again," he greeted with a slight smile, taking in their faces, his dear friends. "Wait, Ash," he started jogging backwards, waving his hand. "If you don't hear from me tomorrow the latest, go to Sinnoh, okay? Regigigas can use its hidden power to restore Pikachu." He didn't wait around to hear their answers. He turned on his heel and sprinted to the aircraft, now already off the ground and gaining altitude. He ducked under it and squeezed himself between the folded landing gear, holding on for his life. The aircraft took off, and Ash locked eyes with his friends, with Brock and the petrified Pikachu, and didn't look away until they were just tiny dots far, far below him. "So," began Ash, turning away from the phone, "I live here. What kind of place is Alola anyway?" Kukui was not yet ready to move on from the topic of time travel, but he supposed he had to, for now. Ash's attention was already shifting, and Kukui could see him looking towards the kitchen with interest. "Alola is a region made up of 4 main islands," he explained quickly. "We are on Mele Mele Island right now. You came here with your mom for a holiday, but you decided to stay and attend the Pokemon school where I'm a teacher at. So yes, you live here, you have for over a year now." "I go to a school here?" asked Ash, surprised. "What about the league? I still won all the gym badges, right?" Ash's cluelessness would have been almost endearing, thought Kukui, if he didn't feel like someone had just stolen something precious from him. "We don't have gyms here," he corrected, and Ash's eyes widened. "Also, this was the very first year for our league, so everyone interested was allowed to take part in it. However, you did very well in all 4 island challenges. Those are traditional trials held on each island that, in a way, could be compared to gym battles in other regions." "Island challenges?" Ash echoed, turning to look at Pikachu. "Sounds cool. Right, Pikachu?" Pikachu tensed, gazing at him uneasily. "Piakaw." "Oh, right," muttered Ash, his brow creasing. "You already did all that." "Why don't you greet the rest of your Pokemon, Ash?" suggested Burnett with a strained smile. "They must be getting anxious. They're usually out of their Pokeballs by now." Ash looked at her blankly for a second before his whole face brightened. "Oh, my Pokemon," he exclaimed. "Right, he patted down the waist of his pants and took out his Pokeballs, releasing everyone at once. It was uncommon for them all to spend the night in their Pokeballs, but Kukui knew it was because the previous day had been hectic and stressful with the aftermath of the league. With the big exhibition match between Ash and Kukui, with the press and the fans and everything still being a bit of a mess after the Ultra Beast's attack. Everyone had needed their space and a moment to recoup afterwards. But the morning was getting late with the Pokemon still inside, and they were not used to that. In an instant, the living room was filled with Ash's Pokemon. Lycanroc didn't waste a second to zoom across the room and leap on Ash, who was so distracted by the rest of his team that he almost fell over by the impact. "Whoa!" he yelled, stumbling back until he managed to brace Lycanroc with his arms. The Pokemon licked his face enthusiastically and Ash pushed it down, laughing. "Wow, this is my team." He looked around with wide eyes. At the hulking Melmetal, at the strikingly colorful Naganadel, at the little Rowlet who flew over to Incineroar and promptly fell asleep on its shoulder. Kukui studied his face, trying to find any sign of recognition in there, but no. Ash grinned brightly at each of the Pokemon, but it just looked wrong. It was that friendly, curious smile one gives to a stranger. Not the smile a trainer. No, a champion gives to his cherished, championship-winning team. Not the smile Kukui had seen Ash give to his Pokemon hundreds of times. The Pokemon crowded around Ash, and Kukui watched with a heavy heart as bit by bit their excitement faded and they stilled, looking at Ash with confusion, with worry. Why wasn't he greeting them like usual? Why wasn't he rushing to give them food? Why wasn't he being there, Ash? "Yes," said Burnett quietly, while Naganadel flew around Ash suspiciously like it was doing a body check on him. "They're yours." "Amazing," grinned Ash, but his smile quickly fell as he noticed the distress he'd just caused. He patted his pockets, twirled around with a frown, and then looked at Kukui and Burnett with a questioning look. "Wait, don't I have a Pokédex?" Ah yes, Rotom. Kukui rubbed the back of his head, thinking. Yes, you did have a Pokédex. He began, and Ash raised his eyebrows. But, you see, it was a so-called Rotom Dex. A Rotom that lives inside a Pokédex. And yesterday after our exhibition match Rotom got another job and it left. Left? Asked Ash blankly. It got a job offer it couldn't refuse, Burnett hurried to say. It's now actually working at the same place where I am. Well, where I should be right now. Today was supposed to be our first day working together. She glanced at Kukui, uncertainly. I'm sure Rotom would come back if we asked it to. Ah, it's okay. Ash looked down where his hand was still buried in Lycanroc's fur, his brow creasing. Lycanroc whined softly and stared back at him with big eyes, and Ash inhaled shakily. I don't know any of these Pokemon, he said then, so quietly Kukui almost didn't hear it. But they know me. The other me. I just wanna. Kukui dipped his chin. I understand. Let me go get my Pokédex. It's quite old, and I haven't updated it in a long time, but, he waved his hand hastily. Just, wait a moment, okay? Ash nodded. Kukui made a face at Burnett, to which she replied with an incredulous look, and somehow that led to some sort of a silent agreement between them. Just a moment, Kukui said again, and quickly walked downstairs into his lab. He didn't run. That would have given the impression that he wanted out of the situation. He didn't, he just needed to go and get the thing. Right. Down at the safety of his lab, he slumped down on his worn sofa, leaned his head against his hands and breathed out deeply. He had not expected his day to go like this. Not even in his worst nightmares had he expected anything like this. For sure, strange things happened around Ash, but really, time travel? His personal moment of crisis was interrupted by an intense memory, him as a child, on a field playing with Litten, meeting Move Kahuna. Wait. He didn't really remember what that kid had looked like, and he had kind of written off that encounter as a false memory anyway, but thinking about it now made him feel strange. Like déjà vu, but with a suffocating, world-turning edge to it. He breathed in deeply, holding his head tightly as something Ash had said to Brock echoed in his mind, demanding attention. It wasn't like when Celebi sends you to another time. He remembered that day clearly. Burnett finding his old childhood photo and book, Ash coming home dirty and bruised and really hyped up about something, and later Rotom proudly showing him pictures of a Celebi it had spotted. They hadn't discussed it further that day. Why? Why hadn't they discussed it further? Kukui rubbed the bridge of his nose. Why hadn't Ash said anything? There was a series of loud crashes from upstairs, followed by Burnett shouting, and Kukui startled out of his thoughts and got up from the couch so fast that his head spun. He glanced around, feeling odd, like he was the one who was somewhere where he shouldn't be. Right, he thought, shaking his head, he came down for the Pokédex, right. Kukui rummaged through his desk drawers and found the old Pokédex he'd been thinking about. It was an old model he'd gotten in Sinnoh as a young adult, with none of the new smart screen technology, or touch screens, or voice commands, or whatever those fancy new ones nowadays had. Kukui had no idea. He picked it up, and even though he hadn't used it in years, it felt familiar to him like he'd never put it away in the first place. Feeling the bulky weight of it in his hands really threw him back to his younger days, when he'd been young and carefree and traveling through the distant regions, still only discovering the wonders the world held. Sometimes, he really missed those days. Kukui wrapped his fingers around the device, pulling himself together. Those memories were distant history. Right now, he had a kid to take care of. He left his lab and climbed back upstairs, pausing at the top step to stare at the scene that had unfolded during his, barely 2 minutes long, absence. Ash was sitting in the middle of the floor, Naganadell's paint like ooze splattered in his hair and laughing like a maniac, while Pikachu sat on the top of his head and rapidly explained something to the rest of the team. Burnett had a bag of poke chow in one hand and a cleaning wipe in the other, and she was trying to wrangle a hungry Melmetal away from the kitchen's utensil drawer, with not much luck. There was poke chow and ooze all over the carpet, and Kukui carefully walked around the mess. He paused next to Ash, and the boy stopped giggling, his eyes curious as he looked up at Kukui and then at the Pokédex in his hand. You okay? Kukui asked, soft amusement in his voice. Ooze was slowly dripping down Ash's face, and he wiped at it with the back of his hand, grinning again. Yeah. Professor Burnett introduced us all already. Naganadell's so cool. I had no idea there were Ultra Beasts and everything. And look at Melmetal, how awesome is it? He stopped short, noticing the trouble the Pokemon in question was causing Burnet. He put a hand to his mouth and hollered. Oi, Melmetal. Stop bothering the professor. Melmetal glanced back sheepishly and backed away from the kitchen. Burnet wiped her forehead, slumping against the countertop with an exasperated sigh. I don't care how extremely rare or mythical you are, young lad, she scolded, waving around a half-eaten frying pan, and Kukui swore he saw Melmetal shrinking in shame. We have been through this. These are tools, not food. Your food is stored in the garage, and nowhere else. Melmetal nodded quietly. Its eyeball drooped ruefully, and it trudged back towards Ash, the entire floor shaking under its weighty steps. Melmetal's a mythical Pokemon? Asked Ash, clearly surprised. He stared at it, a smile spreading on his face. Wow, you're just so awesome, Melmetal. Its eye did a happy twirl, and Kukui was sure it would have blushed if it had a face, or a skin, even. But Ash's attention was already needed elsewhere as Incineroar stomped up to him and posed confidently, its impressive muscles bulging. Rowlet rolled off its shoulder and Ash caught it mid-fall, wrapping it gently in his arms. You're super cool too, Incineroar. Ash complimented easily, and Incineroar let out a pleased grumble. Ash went on. I heard you're really strong. Like really super strong. And, he was cut off by Lycanroc, who pushed its head against him so hard it must have hurt. Ash laughed. You too, Lycanroc. You look amazing. And you, Rowlet. He looked down at Rowlet, who blinked at him sleepily, happily unaware of the ongoing situation. I think you're great. And you, Naganadel, and, he paused, a wistful look settling on his face. He lifted his arms and picked up Pikachu, bringing it onto his lap. And you'll always be my best buddy, Pikachu. Hi ka Pikapi. It was heartwarming, and Kukui only realized he was grinning fondly at the scene when Burnet poked him in the arm with a knowing look. She was smiling sappily too, though, so he didn't mind it too much. I see you've already learned everyone's names, Kukui chuckled. He raised up the Pokédex, inclining his head. I guess we won't be needing this old thing after all. No, let me see, pleaded Ash, finally standing up from the floor. He held out his hand, and Kukui gave him the Pokédex. Ash turned it over in his hands, momentarily confused by the design, and then pointed it at Pikachu. The deck's word to life. Pikachu, the mouse Pokemon. It can generate electric attacks from the electric pouches located in both of its cheeks. I knew that already, Ash grinned. He pointed it at Rowlet next, the owl still firmly held in his arms. The dex beeped. Rowlet, the grass quill Pokemon. A grass and flying type. It swoops down without making a sound and unleashes a powerful kick without being noticed. Nice, a grass and flying type, Ash exclaimed. You next, Lycanroc. The dex pinged as it recorded Lycanroc, but no sound came after that. Kukui leaned over Ash's shoulder and saw a loading icon on the screen before it changed into a no data found message. Ash glanced at Kukui, a baffled look on his face. He turned the dex at Melmetal. Again, there was a ping, but no data appeared on the screen. Kukui winced and rubbed his neck nervously. Oh, strange, muttered Ash. He turned to Incineroar, and that time the dex got a hit. Incineroar, the heal Pokemon. A fire and dark type, and Liden's final evolved form. Incineroar is capable of shooting fire from its midsection. Sweet. Ash cheered. He looked at Naganadel expectantly. The dex, however, seemed to have decided that it had had enough mysteries for one day, and the screen froze before Naganadel's image was even properly recorded. Hey, why aren't you working? Ash whined, shaking the device with some force. Kukui reached in and took it from his hands before he could do any more damage to it. Ah, I kind of expected this, he admitted apologetically. This is such an old model. It doesn't have the newest updates, and I mean, your team includes some of the most major discoveries made in recent times. Ultra Beasts wouldn't be on any normal Pokédex anyway, and Melmetal was added only recently, and Lycanroc's dusk form is such a rare phenomenon that it's been debated if it even was a real thing. Up until you managed to raise one, anyway. Half of my team isn't even on the dex? Asked Ash numbly. He looked around quietly, taking in the Pokemon with a newfound appreciation, assumed Kukui. The teacher in him raised its head excitedly. If you'd like to learn more about them, I would love to, he began, but stopped when Bernard grabbed his arm with an alarmed look on her face. Hold on, Kukui, she exclaimed. Shouldn't you two be at the school right now? Kukui stared blankly at her, realization dawning slowly. Oh shit, they still had class. Well, he uttered, dread creeping into his voice. Yes, we should. He caught Ash's confused, curious face in the corner of his eye. I have to go to work, he explained hastily. At least to tell the rest of the class what's going on. You can stay here if you. No way, yelped Ash, nearly jumping up and down with eagerness. There was still colorful ooze all over his hair, and he looked ridiculous. I want to come too, Professor. If I'm stuck here for now, then I really want to get to see Alola more. Right, though Kukui. That's fine. Into the Pokemon school with a time-traveled Ash it is. Kukui smiled shakily, and Ash grinned. It would be fine. Maybe. Then, Kanto the aircraft climbed, and Ash's fingers were numb with cold when it finally stopped gaining altitude. His eyes watered and his limbs felt frozen around the landing gear pulls, and he wondered how long he would be able to endure it. He stared down at the ground far below and saw the city of Rhoda and the tree of beginning quickly disappearing into the distance. It was strange, seeing everything like that. It was his Kanto down there all right, but it was quite different seeing it from the angle of gods and birds. Speaking of which, Ash turned his head around slowly, and spotted a Pidgeot flying alongside the aircraft, enjoying the twirling currents it created. Hey, said Ash through chattering teeth, his lips almost too numb to form words. Wa nna help me? The Pidgeot looked at him curiously and it drifted closer, dipping into the shadow the aircraft created. Ash reached out his hand, feeling the wind blowing through his fingers, gripping it, forceful like it was something more solid than just air. The Pidgeot flew even closer, and when it was just inches away, it craned its beak, so it gently pressed against his quivering palm. Ash closed his eyes. Oh, how he missed his Pidgeot right then. "I gotta get inside," he gritted out, hoping his voice wasn't completely stolen by the howling wind. "Is there a hatch somewhere?" The Pidgeot pulled away from him and Ash instantly missed the contact. It dipped lower and studied the underside of the aircraft. "Go-to." It called after a short search, and it surged forward and grabbed onto something just behind where Ash's legs were curled against a landing gear pull. Ash craned his head back just in time to see the Pidgeot forcing open a hatch with its claws and revealing a maintenance shaft behind it. "Amazing." Ash whooped, and the bird cooed, a pleased look in its eyes. "You won," added Ash with a numb-lipped grin. The Pidgeot nodded and drifted down and away, back into the sunlight. Ash scooted backwards, balancing precariously on the supports as the wind pulled on his clothes and plastered his hair against his eyes, and he was once again happy he had no tendency towards fear of heights. Though even without that, what he was about to do seemed slightly above the normal levels of danger he was used to in his everyday life. Crouched down, balancing on the balls of his feet on one of the poles, Ash reached for the ladder he could see inside the maintenance shaft. The shaft was very close, just slightly off to the side, and Ash's fingers just managed to wrap around the lowest rung. "Man, all right," he muttered to himself, "here goes nothing." He leaned forwards, letting go with his other hand and grasped onto the rung. His legs slipped off the pole and for a few seconds he just hung there, his freezing fingers holding up his entire weight. Then, gritting his teeth, he pulled up, climbing the rungs with his arms until he finally got a foot up too. It was quiet inside the shaft, peaceful, apart from the wind whistling against the open hatch below him. Ash climbed up as quickly as he could, his arms trembling already from the effort. A moment longer and he wouldn't have been able to hold on. The shaft led to a small maintenance room with nothing much inside it that Ash could recognize. Exhaling deeply, he flopped down on the floor and just laid there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to pull himself together. He'd done it. He'd gotten in. Now, he would need to find Lucario and Mew as fast as possible before Jay's plane had flown them all the way to Sinnoh or wherever it was they were heading. He got up, his exhausted body resisting every movement, but he stubbornly ignored the aches and walked up to the door. Luckily, it wasn't locked, and he slipped into the hallway beyond it. It was quiet except for the low hum of the engines, and no one was around that Ash could see. He walked along the hall, peeking through the doorways that were on the way, but only found rooms after rooms filled with machines and shelves and other boring stuff. Ignoring those, he jogged up a stairwell and paused at the top of it, pressing himself against the wall when he heard voices from nearby. "You think that Lucario actually has something to do with the old-ass legend?" asked a gravelly voice. "The boss seems to think so," answered a man with a younger voice, and added, "I dunno, though. Feels a bit far-fetched if you ask me." "You don't say, and if it turns out to be that kid's Pokemon, then it becomes a lot less valuable than what Jay's hoppin' for, but to be fair, Lucario always sell well enough, so at least we'll get something out of it." They were walking towards him, and Ash reflexively touched his belt where his Pokeballs were, getting ready to defend himself. He wouldn't call out even one of his Pokemon if not absolutely necessary though, since there was a high risk for them to get captured and he couldn't let that happen, no matter what. If it was that kid's, then he was being pretty dumb, even for a squirt, chuckled the younger man. He didn't even try to get it back into its Pokeball or anything. The older man snorted. He didn't call back that Pikachu either, and that rat was definitely his. Maybe he's just one of those new age trainers who practice free-range training or some shit. No Pokeballs, no rules, that kinda crap. I still don't think that Lucario was anything special. Man, you're probably right. They walked past the stairwell, not noticing Ash hiding behind the separating wall, and continued down the hallway making idle conversation. Ash breathed out shakily, his nerves frayed and his entire body tingling uncomfortably. Though, he supposed, the latter might have been mostly caused by his earlier trip into the sky while hanging outside the aircraft. Ash began walking into the opposite direction from where the goons had gone and ended up in a small and messy locker room with clothes and equipment strewn across the floor and benches. He shifted some of it, stuffing anything vaguely interesting into his pockets just in case. He was about to step back into the hallway when he was struck with an intense feeling, a sharp mental tug, like someone was trying to reach out to him. It reminded him of Link he had with Greninja, and he stumbled back into the locker room and sat down on the bench. He pressed a hand against his head and closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation. No, it wasn't like with Greninja. It was more akin to what he'd felt with Riolu back in Sinnoh, the Riolu that Hunter J had been after. He remembered Kellen explaining how his aura was perfectly matched with Riolu's, and that was why he could understand the Pokemon and even sense its location from far away. Additionally, his aura was like Sir Aaron's aura, and Aaron, in turn, had been compatible with Lucario. Ash opened his eyes, raising his head slowly. Lucario was reaching out to him, and he knew where it was. He stood up again, determined now. Lucario wasn't far away, and he could feel it. Only the faintest of sensations, but he could feel it. He sprinted down the hallway, all caution forgotten, and headed towards the source. He pushed open the doors at the end of the hall and Lucario was there, halfway petrified in its glass case, and Hunter J was standing right next to it. "Lucario!" yelled Ash. "You?" snarled Hunter J. "Ca-re!" yelped Lucario, twisting its upper body around desperately. "Let Lucario go!" shouted Ash, and his fingers itched for the Pokeballs. Without the sure and constant presence of Pikachu by his side, he felt vulnerable, unguarded. Hunter J looked at him like he was no more than a piece of dirt on the carpet, worthless. "And why should I do that, brat?" Ash was feeling majorly pissed, and he replied without thinking. "Lucario deserves a free life. It only just got out of Sir Aaron's staff, and I won't let it get captured again." His eyes met Lucario's and they both froze. "Oh, crap. What did you just say?" demanded Jay, her gaze boring into Ash. It's none of your business. Get out, Ash, now." Ash and Jay flinched at the sudden mental tug. They both realized it had been Lucario's words at the same time, and Hunter J twisted around, her mouth gaping. "It knows telepathy?" She reached for the case, and Ash leapt. "Don't!" he screamed, pushing her hand away before she could turn the dial up again. She turned on her heel, lightning fast, and struck him across the chest with the mechanical device around her arm. Ash stumbled back with the impact, grabbed his aching collarbone and glared at her angrily. She didn't seem too bothered about his attempt, and instead stepped back as well and observed him calmly, carefully. "Is this really Sir Aaron's Lucario?" she asked. her delicate brow creasing. How did it come back? How does a young fool like you fit into this? Don't tell her, Ash. Lucario stared at him desperately, and Ash swallowed hard. I don't know, he lied, very hesitantly, and Jay rolled her eyes. Why are you here? How did you get in? Ash bit his tongue, struggling to keep silent. Where's Mew, anyway? He asked instead, looking around. It wasn't in the room. There wasn't much else in the room besides them and Lucario's container. The glass case for it was a big one, taller than he was, and, imperceptibly, he attempted to gauge its weight, if it'd be possible for him to move it. It looked heavy, but he thought he might be able to at least knock it over if he had to. Don't trouble yourself with that. Jay smiled at him, like a predator would smile at her prey. Right now, I'm more interested in the connection you have with this Lucario. And if it really is the legendary Lucario, I might just keep you around as well, while I figure this out. Her hand moved onto her belt, and Ash knew he was out of time. He grabbed one of his Pokeballs at random, not quite sure who was inside it. Hunter Jay yelled. Drapion. Grab him, Ash yelled. Come out, Fanpy. It was Grovyle who came out, and Ash racked his brain trying to remember what moves it knew, while simultaneously ducking and running away from Drapion's pincers. Use Leaf Blade, Grovyle. He yelped, leaping away from Drapion and scrambling along the wall towards Lucario. He could see Grovyle attacking Drapion from the corner of his eye, but Drapion was strong, and it only flinched, responding straight away with cross poison. He knew it would be only a matter of minutes before Jay's henchmen were alerted and Ash and Grovyle would be surrounded by enemies. They had to get away, and fast. Ash spotted a power cabinet near the corner of the room and was suddenly reminded how Pikachu had accidentally blown a hole in Jay's airship the first time they'd met. It gave him an idea. It would be stupid and insanely dangerous, but it might just work. And if it didn't, then Ash had no further plans. Grovyle, he shouted, dashing towards Lucario, breath wheezing in his lungs. Dodge Drapion and use Bullet Seed on that cabinet. Such a nuisance. He could hear Jay scoffing. What are you aiming to do now, brat? Ash was too focused on his plan to pay her any mind. He reached Lucario's container just as Grovyle did as he'd instructed and blew a large hole into the wall, exposing the sky behind. In just a few seconds, the room depressurized, and an intense pull of air grabbed onto Ash, sucking him and a lot of debris in the room towards the hole. Luckily, he had a firm hold on the table the container stood on, and the weight of it kept him in place. All right. He grunted, his shaking fingers slipping on the dial. Let's get you out, Lucario. Wait, stop that, Jay screamed, and finally, she sounded like she was taking Ash seriously. Ash smiled to himself and pushed down the dial. The glass and the stone faded away, and Lucario was free. Grovyle, return, Ash ordered, and only when he knew the Pokémon was safe did he look around. Jay was holding onto a cabinet door, eyes wide and hair flapping around wildly in the wind. Drapion was struggling on the other side of the room, its pincers digging into the floor desperately. Lucario was crouching on the base of the container, intense fury in its eyes. The door burst open, and a handful of grunts stumbled in, yelling in horror as they saw the broken wall. Whoa! What's going on, boss? Don't let them get away, snarled Jay through her teeth, while fighting to keep her balance as the floor tilted and shook. Lucario, Ash said, gaining its attention, we gotta go. I can take them on, Ash. It said it with determination, but Ash knew it was exhausted still, pain lining its movements and the intense look in its eyes. It might be able to fight for a few minutes, but that wouldn't be enough. Not even close. Ash would just have to rely on his insane luck, once again. I have a plan, he lied, and this time it was smoother. Scarily so. Trust me, okay? Lucario looked at him for a second and nodded. I trust you. Ash grinned. He set his jaw, bared his teeth, and didn't pray for salvation. He wouldn't do that, not now, not ever. If Mew or Arceus or whoever it was that wanted him alive, they better pull through now. Come on, he said, and tugged roughly on Lucario's arm, pushing it towards the hole. It staggered against the intense suction, fear taking over the rage in its eyes, and then it was out, flying into the open air. Ash took out a Pokeball. Swellow, he shouted. Catch Lucario. The bird shot out with a screech, flew through the hole and disappeared beyond it. Ash grabbed onto the pedestal where Lucario had stood, lifted it with effort and, ignoring the shouts and screams from Jay and her henchmen, he sprinted after it to the hole and jumped. While Ash rushed off to have a quick shower, Kukui called Principal Oak. He didn't bother explaining the full story but managed to get Oak to agree to pop in and distract his class until he'd have time to get there. He only told him there had been an emergency, which wasn't a lie, and he had forgotten to call in. But everything was fine now, don't worry about it, Samson, they would be there in a hot minute. Everything was fine. Kukui put down the phone, sighed deeply and locked his eyes with Burnett's. Her gaze was hard, torn between emotions, and Kukui knew the scientist in her was going mental right then. This was a problem, an inexplicable equation, and she wanted to solve it. But this was also Ash, and they would have to approach this very carefully. "What are you going to say to your class?" Burnett asked quietly. "You know they're gonna flip their shit about this, Kukui. And they won't take just anything as an explanation. Poor Ash will be. He must be shaken as it is, and he won't recognize any of these people and they're going to demand answers from him." "I'm aware," snapped Kukui, throwing his hands up. "I realize this is bad, this is a huge mess and I really have no idea how to, but we don't have time. We just need to go and do it and sort it out later." He let out a breath, a desperate huff of air, and rubbed a hand across his eyes. They're good kids," he added gruffly, and Burnett dipped her chin, her face softening. "I'm sure they'll understand if I tell them to stay calm about it and give Ash his space." "I hope so," she replied plainly. She sighed as well, then, her shoulders drooping. "I'll call work, take some time off to deal with this." "That's good. But," Kukui hesitated for a moment. "Let's keep the details of this between only the people who need to know, right? At least for now." Burnett gave him a look. "You mean, don't tell Lusamine, don't you?" she drawled, mildly offended. "You really think I would, Kukui? Tattle everything to her, just like that?" Kukui cursed silently. "No, not Lusamine, specifically, it sounded weak, even to his own ears. I won't tell Hala, that nosy bastard, either, but what I meant was, most importantly, no one will tell the media." Burnett's eyes widened a fraction. "Oh shit, you're right. That'd be a disaster. If they realize something is wrong with Ash, with their champion." "Yeah." Through the heavy silence hanging in the air, Ash bounced back into the living room, full of energy, Pikachu on his heels. "I'm ready, Professor," he exclaimed. Moisture was still dragging down the ends of his hair, making the black strands glisten in the sunlight streaming in. His grin was wide and bright. "We're going to the Pokemon school, right? Is it far away? Hey, come back everyone." He took out his Pokeballs, and Kukui jumped, his distracted mind and reflexes taking over common sense. "No, don't," he yelped, too loudly, too sharply, his hand reaching towards the boy. Instantly Ash froze, shoulders raised, and eyed him suspiciously. He didn't take a step back, but he was tense in a way that suggested he was thinking about it. Kukui pulled back, his stomach twisting uncomfortably. The look on his face really hammered home the fact that, however much this kid looked and acted like Ash, he wasn't him. Not really. "Ah, I'm sorry, I just meant," Kukui waved his hand around like he was trying to clear the air physically, to shoo away the cold feeling of mistrust his reaction had left behind. "You shouldn't. Your Pokemon like to stay outside their balls. You usually ask them first if they want to go inside." Burnett placed her hand on his chest, pushing him back ever so gently. She smiled down at Ash, and Kukui could see his shoulders relaxing, bit by bit. "Melmetal likes to be in the Pokeball while you travel," she explained gently. "The same with Incineroar. It's gotten so big and it's not as agile as it used to be, so it prefers to run and work out only when you're properly training. Lycanroc, however, it loves to run with you. Rowlet always sleeps in your backpack and is comforted by the fact that it can get out and fly anytime it wants to. And Naganadel. Well, it hasn't lived with us for that long as a Naganadel, but I think it prefers to stay outside, too." "Right," said Ash, and his eyes flicked from Burnett to Kukui to his Pokemon. He went to pick up his backpack from the corner of the room and turned around, holding it open invitingly. "You want to sleep here, Rowlet?" he asked, and the owl, still half asleep, flew up to him and rolled into the pack. Ash grinned, throwing it over his shoulders. In awe, Kukui watched as he resumed guiding his team like they belonged beside him, like he had always belonged. All right. The rest of you, just tell me if you want to go inside, okay? Melmetal and Incineroar, what did you think? The two large Pokémon nodded, and Incineroar went as far as sitting down on the floor, crossing its arms and yawning widely. Kukui knew it was only putting up a show, but it made Ash giggle, so it was good. Ash recalled the two and beckoned the rest of his team to follow. Let's go, gang. To the Pokémon school. Without further ado he sprinted through the open front door, trailed by the rest of his team and a very startled Kukui. I'll see you later. Kukui called over his shoulder to Burnett, who smiled thinly at him, an intense look in her eyes. Keep him safe, was all she replied. Sun was beating down on them, and Kukui felt drops of sweat building on his forehead as they climbed the hillside road up towards the city. Lycanroc had run ahead, tail wagging excitedly, and Kukui cleared his throat before Ash could take off running after it. So, Brock mentioned you won the Orange League, right? He queried gently, curious to know more about which time frame this Ash was from. How long have you been a trainer? Not super long, replied Ash, but his tone was distracted and his eyes were far away, taking in the beautiful views of Alola. He turned his head and looked at Pikachu on his shoulder, his gaze searching. After Kanto and the Orange Islands I traveled through Johto and Hoenn, but that's it. I was gonna take part in the Battle Frontier next but, he shrugged, waving his hand around with a huff. This happened. I hope I can still do it after I get back. He sounded almost disappointed, but Kukui felt stunned for a moment, not entirely sure how to take in all that information. Kanto, Johto and Hoenn, I think that's a lot, for someone your age, he ended up saying, attempting to tone down the intrigue in his voice. He knew Ash had been around, just the sheer amount of Pokémon he had on Professor Oak's farm was enough to tell him that, but it still surprised him, every time. You think so? Grinned Ash, his lips curling up into a smug smile. Yeah, I guess it is. He crossed his hands behind his head and walked on. Suddenly, he caught sight of Naganadel flying above him. His eyes lit up, still in awe of the Ultra Beast, and he craned his neck to take a proper look. Noticing his eyes on it, Naganadel twirled in the air, letting out a thrilled squeal. Pikachu chirped back at it, and they shared a brief exchange of electricity, making Ash jump and yelp indignantly when he got his share of the shock as well. Kukui let out a chuckle. He couldn't help it, and Ash grumbled for a moment before slowing down his pace to walk beside him. What's the Pokémon school like? He asked after a brief silence. Man, I knew they were a thing, but I didn't think I'd ever want to stay and study in one. Kukui grinned at him. Pokémon school? You'll see. It's even more fun than it sounds, and your classmates. He paused, gnawing on his lips for a second. Your classmates are your great friends, Ash. So they'll be confused, and curious, and maybe a little bit, well, let's just say that it'd probably be better if I go in first, explain them the basics of your situation and only then you come into the classroom. He glanced at Ash. That sound okay? Ash nodded nonchalantly. Yeah, sure. I can wait for a bit. Good. Kukui smiled. And look at that, we're there already. He pointed ahead, where they could see the school building at the end of the path. Let's go. Kukui took a deep breath before rounding the corner into the classroom. He needed to keep control, and he, himself, needed to stay calm. He could do that. Easy peasy. He walked in and saw Principal Oak standing in the middle of the room with a Rhyhorn, colorfully explaining about its habitat. The class seemed to mostly pay attention, though Lana certainly was on her phone under her desk, and Sophocles was, secretly, scrolling through something on his laptop, while nodding along exaggeratedly as he pretended to follow what Oak was saying. And when they saw Kukui then, everyone dropped their act. Ah, Professor! Exclaimed Oak. You're finally here, how great! Lily's hand shot up, though she didn't wait to ask, where were you, Professor? You are usually never late. Are you okay? Asked Mallow. She frowned. Is Ash okay? Where's he? Kiave grumbled, sounding worried. He didn't stop going to school after he won the league, did he? Sophocles slammed his soft fist on the table, yelping, I know. You saw the headline, right? About how they want to interview Ash for Alolan News. Are the reporters surrounding your house already? I bet that's why you stayed in hiding. Lana rolled her eyes at that. Ash probably suffered a horrible injury and the professor had to take him to a hospital, she suggested casually. Leal gasped, covering her mouth with her palm. Don't say things like that, Lana. Mallow scolded. Ash is fine, right, Professor? Everyone turned to stare at him expectantly. And Kukui, of course, had forgotten everything he'd planned to say. Yeah? He stuttered, he's fine, and, what are you even saying, Sophocles? We were not hiding from reporters, Kiave. He hasn't stopped coming to school because of his victory. Lana. He gave her a firm look. He did not suffer any injury. They kept staring, and Kukui kept fidgeting. Then what's the deal? Asked Lana bluntly. Yeah, clearly something's going on, agreed Mallow, eyeing Kukui with suspicion. Kiave crossed his arms, and his glare was burning. You are hiding something, Professor. Kukui sighed, leaning against his desk. It's complicated. I know you are curious, and what I'm about to say will probably sound totally insane, but I need you to stay calm while I explain. All right? As long as you do explain, then fine, said Lily, and everyone nodded along. Good. Slowly, Kukui breathed in and out and said, we're not quite sure what happened exactly, but most likely it has something to do with Mew and time travel. Brock explained to me well, that's not important. But the point is, Ash is not entirely himself, right now. Silence had fallen over the group, and he could see the confusion and concern rapidly forming on their faces. Not entirely himself, repeated Kiave slowly. What do you mean? Kukui waved his hand around vaguely, struggling for words. Do not freak out, but the situation is that he doesn't remember anything from the past couple of years. Not me, not you, nothing about Alola. But they did freak out. It took a while before Kukui got his voice heard again. I told you to stay calm, he loudly exclaimed, effectively quieting down the class. Ash is fine. Brock said he'll be fine. But temporarily, he'll be a bit different. He's still Ash, and you'll see that he's not so far from the kid you know. But the thing you need to understand is that he will not recognize you. No matter how many times you ask, or how many inside jokes you tell him, he won't know you. The students glanced worriedly at each other, suddenly very quiet. It'll be tough. Believe me, I know. But try not to push all your own negative emotions onto him. Be friendly and ask questions in moderation. Do not push. This is harder for him than it's for us, I promise you. We understand, said Mallow somberly. Kukui made eye contact with all of them, lastly with a very serious Principal Oak, and asked, You ready to meet him? Then, it was so loud. The wind, he was. The sun caught his eyes, blinding him. Bright, blindingly so. He was falling, plunging through the sky, the roar of the wind an all-consuming noise in his ears, his eyes watering as he struggled to keep his body balanced, his fingers white around the edges of the container's base, squeezing tight. He stared up at the plane that was rapidly turning into a small dot above him. It was terrifying, nauseating, exhilarating. He would have screamed. With triumph? With fear? Had all the breath not been stolen from his lungs? His brain was in overdrive, and all he could register was the brilliant sky stretching above him. Wide, blue, endless. Air caught the edge of platform and flipped him over. Kanto was down there, he thought, his home. Or maybe they had reached another region already. Whatever. It was quite pretty down there either way. The ground was far away still. He gazed the horizon, admiring it. For a second, it was almost peaceful. Like flying, with no care in the world. Free, he looked back down. The clouds had parted. And he wasn't good at math or anything, but even he could calculate that it was only a matter of minutes, if not mere seconds, before he'd hit the ground. His stomach flipped, and bile rose to his throat, and he thought about Pikachu. Suddenly, he knew it. This was it. He was gonna die. But how could he die before saving Pikachu? That didn't make any sense. Hearing a shrill sound, he turned his head and, further away, he could see that Swellow had caught Lucario, and the two Pokémon were heading his way, panic in their eyes, in their frantic movements. Ash! Ash! It was Lucario's voice, drilling into his head through the overwhelming roar of the wind in his ears. He couldn't answer, he could hardly form a coherent thought. We will catch you. Ash stared at them. Swallow dipped into a nosedive, its dark eyes determined, and Ash shook his head violently. No, no, no. No, he gasped, frantic, as Swallow's claws brushed the fabric of his hoodie. It wouldn't be strong enough, not with the added weight of the pedestal Ash was still holding against his chest, and Lucario sitting on its back. It was gonna get dragged down with him. Swallow's claws wrapped tightly around his left upper arm, the sharp ends digging in and piercing his skin, but he hardly felt it. The Pokémon fell with him for a moment before opening its wings and pulling up. It was nowhere near enough. Swallow screamed in pain as the sudden weight strained its wings. Ash screamed in pain as its claws dug deeper into his arm. Lucario was yelling with them, even its mental voice near incoherent. Still, Swallow fought. It kept its wings open, a whine coming through its beak, swallowed by the rush of the wind. Ash was curled around the container base, teeth gritted, and eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching ground. They wouldn't make it. They had slowed down minutely, thanks to Swallow's efforts, but they wouldn't make it. Let go. Let go. Swallow, Ash shouted, near hysterical now. Let go now. They were about to hit the ground. Maybe, just maybe Ash could call Swallow back just in time, and land under Lucario, softening its landing. But even that was a sketchy plan at best. Aura. Ash, let's use our aura. It took a moment for Lucario's words to register. It took another for him to realize how absurd they were. I can't, he yelled. His throat was tight, and the words came out chopped. I don't know how to. I literally cannot. The ground was right there. It was right there. They were gonna crash. We can do it. I will help you. They were over a pond. The water was glimmering in the sun, fresh and inviting, but Ash knew it'd be like landing on concrete. No, I can't. Aura will protect us. Believe in it. Lucario's soft paw touched Ash's neck, and he felt a jolt inside, like a shock of electricity, but warmer. Who do you want to save? Ash's chest constricted, and his eyes filled with tears, and he thought, Pikachu. You. Swallow. Mew. The warmth expanded. He thought, I gotta be alive to help them. Lucario's paw was burning hot against the base of his skull. Ash stared at their reflections on the dead calm surface of the pond, and he thought he could see a faint blue barrier forming around them. He blinked, and they were underwater. They weren't dead. They separated in the water. Ash struggled to swim up, the shock of the cold water flowing into his eyes and nose overwhelming him for a moment. Luckily, the pond wasn't deep, and he broke the surface after few frantic seconds, and he dragged himself to the shore and looked for the Pokémon. Swallow shot through the surface next and landed on the shore close by. Instantly, it fainted, into a heap of wet, soggy, damaged feathers. Ash crawled next to it and dragged its head onto his lap. He brushed a hand along the long feathers on its head, smoothing them down. You did good, he murmured, bracing his trembling hand against its heaving chest. So good, so good. Lucario's head poked through the surface, and it looked at their direction. It swam up to them and Ash helped it climb up to the wild grass. It slumped down, face to the ground, and shook in its place, an odd noise coming from its throat. We did it, Ash, yeah. Lucario turned its head and looked at him, and Ash realized what the sound had been. Lucario was laughing. Manic glint in its eyes, teeth bared, animalistic laugh. It rolled onto its back and howled, weakly clutching its stomach. Ash stared at it for a moment before he started to laugh, too. They were alive. They were actually alive. After all that. After all the ridiculous crap he'd pulled back there, and the skydive into nothingness, and Aura. It was painful to laugh. His stomach cramped, and the noise that came out of his mouth sounded like he was choking, and he felt like he was about to pass out. Tears came next, and he sat there and sobbed, and Lucario sobbed with him, curled against his side. After that passed, he flopped onto the grass and stared up, puffy red eyes fixed on the slow-moving clouds. The sky was still blue, and the birds were still singing, and the world hadn't stopped, not even for a second. He laid there, just breathing, until Swallow woke back up and poked him gently with its beak. Yeah, I'm alive. He grumbled softly, moving his arms to get up, but as he put down weight on his arms, his left one suddenly lit up with pure agony and he fell back down, groaning. Swallow whined in a low voice, and Lucario sat up and peered down onto his arm, and Ash could see its eyes widening. "You are bleeding, Ash." Ash laughed tiredly. "Yeah." He glanced at his upper arm where Swellow had harshly grabbed him. The sleeve was shredded to pieces and his arm was torn with 8 deep gashes, still steadily dripping blood. The grass under him was wet with it, and he stared with some interest as the rivulets traveled down the slope towards the pond. "Ah, we need to stop the bleeding, somehow. I don't know anything about medicine, Aaron never taught me." "Just calm down," Ash said, pushing himself up with just his right arm, this time successfully. He looked around for something helpful but saw nothing. Yeah, they were in a forest. He knew that, of course. Where was Brock when he needed him? He looked back down at his soaked jeans. "Can you tear off my pant leg, Lucario?" he suggested then, feeling quite clever, "and wrap it tightly around my arm." Lucario did so, and the pressure around the wounds felt relieving and uncomfortable at the same time. Ash tested the arm, moving it around in the air, and it hurt, and the fabric was instantly soaked through with blood, but it was a little bit better anyway. He hoped. "That will only help us for a short time," observed Lucario. "We need to get you to a healer." "Healer?" asked Ash. "Don't you mean a poke center?" Lucario cocked its head. "What is a poke center?" "You don't know?" blurted Ash, before remembering that Lucario was from a totally different time. I mean, it's a place where you can get your Pokemon healed after a battle, and usually you can sleep there for the night. And Nurse Joy always helps me when I've gotten hurt, too." He glanced at Swellow. It still looked nearly fainted and was gazing sadly at his wrapped arm. Ash petted its neck and it cooed softly, its head lowering in shame. "You were so brave," he said to it. "We'd have never made it without you, you know? You slowed us down just enough, so we had time to." He trailed off. He had no idea how to continue. "You deserve a good rest," he said instead. He took out Swellow's Pokeball, holding it between his fingers. "I'll find a poke center, and the next time you get out, you'll be as good as new, I promise." Lo! It whined, pressing its head down onto Ash's thigh, and Ash recalled it back into its Pokeball. "Those things," said Lucario, its eyes fixed on the ball, "where do they take us?" Ash laughed, startled. "Huh? You mean Pokeballs?" "Yes. Do they transport us somewhere? Because how could how could any Pokemon fit into a tiny thing like that?" Ash stared at Lucario, dumbfounded. I dunno, actually." They looked at each other, silently, for a moment. There was sincere concern in Lucario's eyes, and for some reason that amused Ash, so much that he nearly started giggling right there and then. But then, Lucario grabbed his good arm and pulled him up, roughing him out of his stupor. "We need to go. We need to find shelter, and a heal and a Pokemon Center. Quickly. You will not last much longer." Ash staggered onto his feet, following blindly after Lucario as it headed for the tree line. "It's just a scratch," he insisted, as the forest spun around him. Green, green, all around him. Beautiful. "I'm fine. I just gotta eat something, and sleep, and I'll be fine." "You are slurring your words. Come on." "I'm not," slurred Ash. "I'm just fine." Lucario pulled him along, its pace relentless. And if Ash stumbled and tripped over every small obstacle, that was just because Lucario was going too quickly. "Slow down." Lucario glanced at him over its shoulder. "Did you say something? Can ya go just a lil bit slower?" Lucario was standing still now. It grabbed his shoulders, shaking him gently. Its paw pressed on one of the wounds, and tears prickled in the corners of Ash's eyes. "Ow, stay with me, Ash, just a little bit longer." The world spun faster, his vision narrowing into a pinprick of blue fur, before darkness overwhelmed him. Awareness came to him in bits and pieces. Someone was carrying him in their arms. Had he fallen asleep training again? Professor Kukui always carried him inside, onto the sofa when he did. He would warm up hot cocoa and make him something to eat before bed. Take care of his Pokemon for him, and even fluff up his pillows sometimes. He was so nice. Ash was so lucky to live with him. He woke up just as he felt himself being laid down gently onto something. Soft voices spoke over him, Pokemon voices. Grovyle and Lucario. "Grov, Grovy la Grov. Carry Ca Rika. Vile, la Grovyle." It went on, and Ash was way too exhausted to try to understand them. Once he felt awake enough, he rubbed a hand across his face, cleaning up worst of the soot from his eyes and peeked through his heavy eyelids. "Hey," he said, hoarsely. "What happened?" Both Pokemon quieted down instantly and leaned over him, scrutinizing looks on their faces. "Vile. You passed out. As I knew you would." Ash frowned. That snark was uncalled for. Though he did pass out, Lucario wasn't wrong on that. "Sorry," he grumbled, and his attempt to sit up was quickly stopped by Grovile's heavy palm on his chest. "You need to stay still," ordered Lucario sternly. It turned to address Grovile. "Raise him up, just a fraction. Maybe he could rest against your legs." Grovile did as it was told, and soon Ash was halfway on its lap, blinking tiredly. Lucario brought an empty shell filled with water to his lips, letting him drink it down. The cold water was amazing for his parched throat, and Ash felt a little less awful after that. "Thanks, guys," he mumbled, and Grovile let out a soft rumble from its chest. He turned his head around carefully, noting his surroundings. They were in a cave of some sort, but light was still streaming through the entrance. His head felt muddy and his entire body sore, though the worst was his arm, throbbing painfully with each beat of his heart. He looked at Lucario, brushing his still moist hair away from his face, and asked, how long was I out?" "Not for long," it replied, settling down to sit beside him. "I was not able to carry you on my own, so I summoned Grovile from the Pokemon ball you had on your belt. Together we managed to get you into this nearby cavern." "Oh, okay." He shivered, his cold and damp clothes sticking to his skin uncomfortably. There was something nagging him in the back of his mind, something important he was sure he'd forgotten. But his stomach was rumbling, and suddenly the most urgent thing on his mind was food. "Did you see any berries around?" he asked eagerly. Then, he moaned, "Man, I'm so hungry I could eat a beware." Lucario looked like it wanted to ask what a beware was, before shaking its head. "No," it replied, "but I sent your other Pokemon companions to find us something to eat, and to look for a village or a healer. Corphish and Phanpy were their names." Ash blinked at it incredulously. Hold on, you released all my Pokemon while I was unconscious? And sent two of them into the forest alone?" Lucario nodded, not looking the least apologetic. "They seemed perfectly capable of taking care of themselves. That's not the point. Do not worry so much, Ash. I am sure they will soon return with abundant amounts of food for us." Ash shared a look with Grovile, who whined quietly. They were not as sure. Ash huffed, feeling helpless and frustrated with the situation. "Let me sit up," he ordered, in his best trainer voice. "I promise I'll be careful." Grovile eyed him suspiciously before allowing him to haul himself into a sitting position. He poked his injured arm with his finger, and for one responsible moment, wondered if he should maybe rip off his other pant leg and change the dirty binding over the wounds. To be honest, he didn't really remember how these kinda things were meant to be treated. It could probably wait. "Right," he said then, "as soon as Phanpy and Corphish return, we gotta start moving and find a poke center. Swellow is really hurt, and you don't look too good either, Lucario." "It is not me you should be concerned about, Ash." Ash shrugged lopsidedly. "Yeah, we also really gotta find a way to contact Brock and the others. I miss Pikachu so." He cut off suddenly, his stomach bottoming out. Pikachu. It was still petrified, and the only reason Ash had risked everything and stolen the container from Jay was to restore Pikachu with it. He had fallen from the sky still holding it. But where was it now? He looked around frantically, but it was nowhere in sight. After all that, he had still lost it. Somehow, Lucario understood the reason for his shock, and it placed a supporting paw on his good shoulder. "Pikachu is going to be okay. The container must still be in the bottom of that pond we fell into." Ash's anxiety eased a little. That was true, it had to be in the pond. And the water hadn't been deep or that muddy, so they could probably find it easily enough. Maybe Corphish could do it. Ash took a few deep breaths, calming himself down. He stared at his shaking palms, at his blood-stained gloves and at his wrist with no Z-ring. He set his jaw and balled his hands into fists. They were still okay. And they would save Mew, whatever it took. "Ash, Kukui called. You can come in now." The doorway stayed empty, and the pit in Kukui's stomach grew bigger. "Where is he?" asked Lily, her hand curling around Snowy's back. The rest of the class fidgeted anxiously, and Kukui knew they were seconds away from another freak out. "Ash," he called again. He cleared his throat and marched to the door, looking out into the hallway. The very, very empty hallway. "Crap," he muttered under his breath. "Professor?" asked Kiave from behind him. "Where'd he go?" Kukui swirled his head around, looking in every possible direction, with no luck. Principal Oak leaned against the wall next to him, murmuring, Ash used teleport. Kukui gave him a very firm glare before turning back to his class, attempting to keep his composure as relaxed as possible. "Oh, you know Ash," he chuckled weakly. "He probably saw something interesting and wandered away, but he was just there, so he can't have gotten far." There were sudden loud noises coming from outside, first shouting and then multiple Pokémon being released, and everyone in the room froze. There was laughter, and someone sneered, "You think you're such a big deal now, huh, champion boy?" Kukui felt his face paling. He ran through the classroom, the kids at his heels, and leaned over the balcony railing to look down onto the yard. Ash was standing there, his stance wide and Pikachu at his side, staring down the annoying bunch of Team Skull grunts currently surrounding him. There was a younger girl a slight distance behind Ash, curled crying on the ground, hugging an injured Poplio in her arms. "I don't care who you are, I'm not letting you bully anyone like that," Ash was saying angrily, pointing vaguely in the girl's direction. "If you want to battle with somebody, battle with me." "Look at him pretending he don't even know us," snickered the pink-haired girl. "All high and mighty with his new big title." "Yeah," replied the biggest of the three. "He probably thinks he's better than us or something." "We've been training too," Ash snapped the blue-haired guy, his voice seething. "Maybe Guzma's ready to let you be, but we're not. Get ready for your humiliating defeat." The young girl had crawled closer to Ash, and was tugging on his shirt, drawing his attention to her. "I didn't even want to fight with them, but they still beat up my Poppy really badly, Champion Ash," she nervously said. "Be careful, please." Ash smiled and nodded encouragingly at her, and then turned his glare back to the grunts. "Fine with me," he shouted back. "You get ready too, 'cause I'm gonna defeat you." "He's really hot-headed today," murmured Mallow, and something about that statement snapped Kukui out of his trance. He shook his head and yelled, "Ash!" His voice rang loud and hard across the yard, and everyone down there looked up with various expressions of shock and anger. But he only had eyes for Ash, who glared up at him with an annoyed tilt to his brow and hadn't relaxed his battle-ready stance the least. "Let me handle this, Professor," he called back, the fire in his eyes clear even from distance. "I'm gonna teach these guys a lesson." "Oh yeah?" snarled the girl. "Like that's gonna happen?" "Yeah. You just wait," snapped Ash, and they were instantly back at it. It was the Skull Grunt's 9 Pokémon against Ash's Pikachu. The Lycanroc and Naganadel were hanging out behind him, looking somewhere between bored and excited. On a normal day, Kukui wouldn't have batted an eye seeing a battle like this take place. He knew Ash could take on a group like that easily, and more. But this wasn't a normal day, not even close. This Ash had come from the past less than 2 hours ago and had no idea who Team Skull were, that they tended to fight dirty. Gods, he barely knew who his own Pokémon were. This could go badly. Really badly, he called, desperate. "Let it go, okay? Just this once. Hey, didn't you want to meet your classmates?" Ash shrugged, not even bothering to avert his eyes from the grunts anymore as he replied, "Well, soon, yeah. I'll just beat these guys first." The big guy laughed. You scared, champ? Need your daddy to look out for you, huh?" Kukui could see Ash seething with anger, and his stomach curled anxiously. This Ash was so reckless, too reckless. He must have known he was at a huge disadvantage, with a team he didn't know, against opponents he didn't know, but who knew him. He really shouldn't agree to a battle like that. Pikachu seemed to be getting some second thoughts too, and it glanced back at Ash with a concerned look. Ash just waved his hand at it and said, "Come on buddy, don't be like that. We gotta fight, right?" Then he grinned, dangerous, and stared at his opponents. "I choose you, Pikachu." Accepting the situation as what it was, Pikachu stepped forward, cheeks bristling, and it didn't look any less dangerous than when it had been facing Tapu Koko. The grunts glanced at each other with barely concealed worry, but quickly hid it under anger, ordering their Pokémon to attack. "You said Ash doesn't know anyone here, or anything about Alola?" asked Kiave quietly, his eyes fixed on the starting battle. "Unfortunately, yes," replied Kukui tightly. "That's why I'm so worried about this." Kiave looked at him, face drawn tight with concern and fury. "Then he doesn't know anything about Z moves either. There's no way he's defeating all those guys with just Pikachu's normal moves." Before Kukui could say anything, the boy had taken off, running towards the hallway. "I'm going down there, at least it'll be 2 against 3, then." "Wait, Kiave!" Kukui yelped, but he didn't dare take his eyes off of the battle for any amount of time. And maybe it was only a good thing that Kiave was going, he thought silently. He, at least, knew these grunts, and could be a proper help. "Whoa, it's getting pretty heated down there," said Lana, who was on her tiptoes leaning as far as she could over the balcony railing. Lily hovered behind her, Snowy tightly tugged under her arms. Mallow twirled a strand of hair around her finger nervously, and Sophocles was twitching with excited energy, fingers tightly curled around the railing. "You think Ash is gonna beat them?" he asked, and Togedemaru chirped confidently on his shoulder. "He and Kiave, for sure," nodded Lana with a knowing look. "No way's Ash gonna lose to a bunch of asswipes like them." "Lana," chided Kukui distractedly. The battle was going surprisingly okay so far. Ash and Pikachu worked well together, even with the strain of the time skip, and few of the grunt's mediocre Pokémon had already been taken out. A thunderbolt struck through the opponents, taking out about half of the remaining. But while Pikachu was getting ready for another attack, 3 of the grunt's Pokémon rushed it, tackling it and spilling poison all over it. "Pikachu!" shouted Ash with concern. "You okay?" Pikachu stumbled for a second, exhausted, but it stayed on its feet. It nodded. "The battle is almost over," observed Principal Oak morbidly. "If Ash doesn't call forward his other Pokémon soon, he will get sorely defeated." Kukui knew he was right. It didn't help at all. "Dodge it, Pikachu, use quick attack." But Pikachu was too weak, too injured to execute the move perfectly. It faltered as it ran, and one of the Zubats got another wing attack on it. Pikachu screamed in pain, and Ash begged it to get up. "Please Pikachu, just hold on for a little while longer." And that was when Kiave finally got there. He didn't waste any time releasing Turtonator and preparing for a Z move. He called forth the full power of the Wella volcano, and the following fire show blasted the grunts and their Pokémon all the way to the other side of the yard. When the dust settled, Kukui could see Ash standing there, just staring at Kiave in absolute awe and shock, before he remembered the battle and rushed to Pikachu, falling on his knees beside it. "Pikachu!" he yelped, gathering its trembling form onto his lap. "Man, you're poisoned, oh, man." Kukui couldn't just watch anymore. He turned on his heels and rushed into the hallway, leaping down the stairs 2 at a time, and strode across the yard towards his students. "Ash," he called, and the boy looked up, his brown eyes wide and anxious. "Give this to it, right away." He threw a Pecha berry at him and Ash caught it easily, bringing it to Pikachu's mouth. The Pokémon nibbled at it weakly, and slowly, steadily, it grew more alert. Kukui reached Ash and Kiave's side and crouched next to Ash. He gently grasped the boy's arm, bringing his eyes up to him. "I'm glad you're okay," he said, and the sternness of his own voice surprised him. "But that was ill-advised, what you did, Ash. You put Pikachu in a lot of danger. You only just got here, knowing nothing of this place, about the people and Pokémon here. Why was a battle the first thing in your mind?" Ash blinked at him a few times before his gaze lowered, his eyes disappearing behind the bill of his cap. "Sorry," he mumbled, quietly, resentfully. His hands were tight around Pikachu, fingers digging into the soft fur. Pikachu let him hold it, though Kukui could see it watching Ash, mixed emotions clouding its gaze. "I just, what?" asked Kiave, and Kukui was startled by the honest anger in his voice. Ash looked up at Kiave, mouth thinning, brow creasing, and Kiave held his gaze firmly. "What were you doing? Putting your pride and selfish needs to prove yourself before the safety of your own partner?" The Ash I know. Kiawe, warned Kukui. Kiawe's mouth snapped shut momentarily, but he was too wound up not to add, seriously, if you'd stopped to think even for a second. Ash shot to his feet, his mouth curled into a snarl. You don't even know what happened. He yelled back, and Kukui flinched at the scene. It was so wrong. So wrong. So wrong. They were bullies, and I don't care if we're at a disadvantage, we always fight against jerks like that. Kiawe raised his brow, arms crossed tightly. Even if you'd certainly lose. Ash nodded, not a second of hesitation. Even if we'd lose. Right, Pikachu. There was dark amusement in Pikachu's eyes as it agreed, Pika. Ash nodded again. Then, he looked at Kukui, the anger in his features mostly gone. You got any more of those berries, Professor? He asked, and the radical subject change threw him off for a second. Kukui breathed out, slowly, and mostly steadily, and nodded. Yeah, follow me. He shared a look with Kiawe. The kid was clearly still pissed off, but there was also confusion in his glare, agitation. Worry, for his friend he didn't know anymore. Kiawe was a good kid, and so was Ash. They just needed some time to get to know each other again. 15 minutes later they were back in the classroom. Ash was standing in the front with Professor Kukui, while the rest of the class sat in confused silence. So, Ash, began Kukui, waving his hand awkwardly. These are your classmates. You met Kiawe already. Why don't you all tell a little bit about yourself? Lana, you can start. Sure, said Lana, sitting up straighter. So my name's Lana. This is my partner Sandy, she petted her Eevee, who crooned happily, and my other partner is Primarina. I love water-type Pokemon, and I want to study the ocean, and find Manaphy. Oh man, that's so cool! Exclaimed Ash with a big smile, and everyone relaxed slightly at the familiar reaction. I wanna meet Manaphy, too. Right, replied Lana with a cheeky grin. When summer break starts, I'm going out to the ocean with my dad to do just that. You are? Asked Mallow, her eyes widening. I didn't know. Lana shrugged apologetically. We only just decided yesterday. Sorry, I didn't have time to tell you. How about you, Mallow? Kukui prompted, before the girls could get too far off track. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your goals. They went through the class like that. Everyone kept their words quite light and vague, and Ash nodded along, clearly intrigued by the different lives they led and excited about the various Pokemon he saw roaming around the kids. Mallow wanted to improve the family restaurant, Lily wanted to awaken Majerna asked Ash, and Sophocles wanted to start training towards becoming an astronaut. When it came to Kiawe's turn, the atmosphere in the room changed slightly. Ash had clearly chosen the fire-type trainer as his new rival, and Kiawe was more than happy to accept that. I wanna train hard to get much stronger, Kiawe said with a fierce smile. I'm gonna work towards my island challenge next, but before all that, he leveled an intense stare at Ash. I wanna challenge you to an all-out battle. Ash stepped forward, fists rising, grinning from ear to ear. Oh yeah, challenge accepted. Kukui laughed nervously, and Lana muttered, well, some things never change. Then, the sun was starting to drop behind the treetops, and the air grew chilly and heavy around them. Ash was sitting by the cave entrance, staring into the forest's shadowy depths, like he thought he could find the answers to their problems there if he just looked hard enough, when Lucario came to sit beside him. Hello, Ash. Hey, mumbled Ash, glancing at the Pokemon briefly. He still felt a little woozy. He had drunk a lot of water and eaten a few berries they had found close by, but it hadn't really been enough. They couldn't risk wandering too far away from the cave though, because it was the place where Corphish and Phanpy would return to, and it wasn't like either of them had any energy to look around anyway. They would just have to push through this. Lucario scooted even closer, its arm brushing against his, offering comfort and demanding attention. Do you know if that hunter will come after us? Ash flinched, his breath catching for a split second before he forced himself to relax again. He had thought about it already, of course he had, but that didn't make it any easier to admit it out loud. Yeah, he said, slowly, almost like a sigh. But not right away, I guess. Catching Mew was her priority, so she'll probably make sure she's got it secured first, before coming after us. Lucario tensed, its paws curling as its head dropped lower, anxiety flowing out of it in waves, so strongly that Ash could swear he felt it affecting him, too. Chest feeling tight, hands trembling, he forced a smile and hurried to continue. Hey, I dunno if she's interested enough, though. Jay's all about money, you know. If she gets a better deal somewhere else, I don't think she'll bother with us anymore. Lucario let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a whine, like a trapped animal. She seemed quite curious about both of us. Ash, how common are aura users in your time? Ash glanced at it, eyes wide, jaw clenching, before he looked away again, into the darkened woods ahead. Suddenly, he could vividly remember the burn against his neck as Lucario channeled its aura into him in its desperate attempt to save them. The scorching pain in his hands as his life force drained into Mew and the world turned hazy around him. The faint blue barrier around him and Lucario as the silver mirror surface of the pond was just inches away from his face. He shuddered, poked at his arm again, and winced. Sadly, it wasn't feeling any better yet. He mumbled, not at all common. Without looking, he could tell Lucario was staring at him. He could feel its piercing glare digging through his dirty, tangled hair and into the back of his skull, hungry for an explanation Ash didn't have. Its tone, even through telepathy, was curious as it next spoke. You had no idea you could use aura before you came to Rhoda Kingdom, is that correct? Well, yeah. And after what Mew did, you came from the future, and you still did not know how to control it, when we fell. Ash whipped his head around so fast his world spun for a second. Lucario, he said, voice cracking, there are no aura guardians anymore. No human freely uses aura in this world. No one. Lucario's head tilted. I do not understand, Ash. As an aura guardian one can do so much good. It was always Aaron's dream, to have the skills and power to protect people. Do you not want that? The words twisted something deep in Ash's chest. He did, of course he did. He loved the world, and he wanted nothing more than to protect it, but he felt burdened by the world already. Maybe he was being selfish, but he really couldn't have that extra title added onto his shoulders. The chosen one on its own was enough, and how lucky would he be if that had turned out to be the only one he needed to bear. He said, hoarsely, I can't. But I could feel how strong you were. I know, I could teach you, with some practice. Ash closed his eyes, painfully tightly. Don't. It's not for me. Thanks, Lucario, but there's enough going on without all that. I'm sorry. Lucario seemed to get the hint, since the next time Ash opened his eyes and looked at it, it had turned its head away and was staring into the forest, a thoughtful frown on its face. They were quiet for a long while after that, a silent hum of something between them, a warmth of some kind, and Ash almost dozed off for a minute, his head dipping as exhaustion did its best to drag him down. There was something echoing in his head, something Professor Kukui had said to him one evening while patching him up after an eventful day. Listen, Ash, he'd said, in that low, serious voice he only used when he really needed to get his point across. One of your strongest qualities is your drive to help others above everything. It's rare, and incredibly special, to be as selfless as you are. But if I could give you one piece of advice, he had paused, and Ash remembered nodding despite his confusion. Kukui's hand had been heavy on shoulder, big and warm, and comforting, but heavy. What I think you need to work on is taking care of yourself, too. Sometimes, putting your own needs above others is the right thing to do. There is a balance in there that, maybe, you haven't quite yet found. Ash hadn't really gotten it then. He still didn't, not truly, because how could he know when that was the right thing to do? What if, when doing that, he allowed something irreversibly bad to happen that he could have stopped? He knew he wasn't the center of the world, and awful things happened whatever and however much he fought against it all, but how could he justify not doing everything he could to prevent even some of that hurt? He sighed quietly. Lucario's aura mixed into his in a silent hum, a strange, warm dance of energy, and Ash struggled to breathe calmly. Was he letting Lucario down? When refusing to train his aura, was he letting the world down? Or was this part of what the professor had tried to tell him? Could it really be okay, despite everything his decision could cause, to do something as selfish as that? He really wished he knew. He was startled back to alertness when next to him, Lucario suddenly jumped, its ears flying upwards and its body tensing, gaze fixed to the side. Few seconds later, Ash could feel it too. Someone was approaching. The feeling was shortly followed by the sound of snapping twigs and rustling leaves, and then the two forms of his Pokémon appeared from between the trees. Corphish. Phanpy, Ash exclaimed, and the Pokémon instantly dropped what they'd been carrying and ran up to him, trampling all over his legs as they crowded in to nuzzle him. Ash giggled with relief and hugged them tightly, briefly burying his face against Phanpy's large, soft ear. I missed you, guys, man, I'm so glad you're okay. Stop walking all over him, can you not see how hurt he is? And did you find anything useful for us? Corphish and Phanpy backed off instantly, and Ash whined, "Ah, Lucario, don't be so harsh, they were just saying hello." But he did watch with interest as the Pokémon dragged their findings closer. Corphish had brought an armful of berries and Phanpy had something wrapped in its trunk, something papery and rolled up. They dropped them at his and Lucario's feet and Ash instantly reached for a berry, stuffing it halfway into his mouth as he took up the rolled paper and smoothed it open with his hand. It was a map of some sort, an impeccably detailed drawing of a landscape, dotted with tiny markings and text Ash could hardly read from the wrinkled surface of the paper. Looks like a hiking map, he observed between ravenous munches of his berry, vaguely recognizing the shapes on the map. It took his overtaxed mind a few moments to place the landmarks shown on it, but as he finally did, his eyes widened in surprise. He pointed at the map with a shaking finger, gasped, "We're in Sinnoh." "Sinnoh?" asked Lucario, staring at the map with confusion. "Are you sure?" "Look, I recognize this town. It's Orberg City, where I got my coal badge." Excitement bubbling in his chest, he followed the paths leading out of it with his finger, realizing they were heading up into the mountains that took most of the space on the map. The focus was clearly on the hiking paths, but the few bigger roads in the corner of the town shown on it could turn out helpful later on. He turned to look at his Pokémon, exclaiming, "Great work, this is awesome. Where did you find this?" Corphish pointed vaguely into the direction they'd come from, and Phanpy said, Phanpy PHA. "About a 20-minute walk that way," Lucario translated. It looked at the setting sun and hummed. "That is, towards north." Ash nodded as he destroyed another berry. "Okay," he mumbled, mouth full. "Did you see the city there? Or a poke center?" Corphish hish. "A Pokémon center." Lucario listened a while longer as Corphish explained something and then continued, tone slightly disgusted. They stole it from a trash bin behind the building." "Oh," Ash's smile dimmed slightly as he eyed the berries on his lap with suspicion. Then, deciding he didn't really care, snorted, "I guess that explains why it's so rumpled and dirty, huh?" He laughed quietly and pushed himself onto his wobbly legs. "Anyway, we gotta get moving if we want to get there before dark, right?" Corphish and Phanpy looked at him with sudden worry, and Lucario stood up as well, grabbing his arm to help him keep his balance. "Are you sure you are well enough to walk, Ash? You seem terribly weak still." Ash grumbled, "I'm fine. Let's just go." Swellow's Pokeball weighed heavily against his hip, and Grovyle, though it had been very reluctant to agree, was in its ball as well. Ash sighed, and said to Phanpy, "You should go back in. I think we gotta keep our group as small as possible, just in case." Phanpy agreed with a sad nod. When it was back in its ball, Ash secured it onto his belt, feeling a heaviness in his bones that wasn't just from exhaustion. Jaw set, he took a deep breath, wiped cold sweat from his forehead and faced the forest. "Right. Corphish, let's go back to the pond first. You can help us find this device on the bottom of it. And after that, we're not stopping until we find that poke center." Half an hour later, or an hour, or 2 hours, Ash had no idea anymore at that point. They were stumbling along, deep in the pitch-black forest, still looking for the promise of a poke center, a place to rest, to heal. They had lost their way a long time ago, and Ash could barely see through the fog in his eyes as he staggered on, rolling the heavy platform across the bumpy forest floor. They took turns, with Lucario, and with Grovyle who had forced itself out of the Pokeball the third time Ash had fallen over, but all of them were way past their limits already. "It's just here," Ash whispered breathlessly, trying to convince himself as much as his team. "Just around here, it's gotta be." He tripped on a root and fell to his knees, his breath ringing raggedly in his ears. Grovyle bent over him silently, taking the weight of the platform with its clawed hands. Lucario swayed next to him, and it leaned against a tree stump, eyes tightly closed. "I can sense her aura," it muddily said, pearls of sweat glistening on its forehead. "You are correct, Ash, we are almost there. If only I could focus a little better." "Don't worry about it," said Ash, teeth gritting together as he got up again. "Let's just keep walking." Corfish whined softly. It blamed itself for not having been able to lead the group to the center like it had aimed to, and instead now they were all lost. Nothing Ash had said, trying to convince it none of this was its fault, had mattered. The shame and self-hatred surrounding the small Pokémon were intense and getting worse by the minute. "Almost there," Ash encouraged quietly, and they pushed through another batch of thick undergrowth, suddenly stumbling into a clearing. The halogen lights of the Pokémon Center were almost blindingly bright in the darkness of the night, and Ash stared blearily at the building, not really comprehending what he was seeing. It was almost dreamlike, an oasis of safety surrounded by vast nothingness. A lighthouse in the middle of a stormy ocean. "What is this place?" asked Lucario, and the lights were reflecting from its dazed eyes as it stood there, shaking from head to toe. Ash laughed. A huff, and another huff. He clutched his stomach, willing the pain to lessen. "We made it," he grinned. Later on, he couldn't really recall much of the next half an hour. He remembered standing at the front desk, calling out for Nurse Joy. He remembered laying on the floor, an overly concerned Chansey leaning over him. He remembered Nurse Joy's distress. "Oh dear. Oh dear." As she took his Pokémon, took Lucario, to the back room, leaving him alone on the cold laminated floor. He came back to himself a bit more when a small and warm hand brushed his hair away from his face. He opened his eyes and stared blearily into Nurse Joy's big eyes. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her smile mostly masking the anxiety in her expression. "Can you sit up?" She helped him onto a nearby sofa. A first aid kit spilled on the table next to it. She didn't ask permission to cut clean through the jean bandage on his arm, and Ash didn't argue. The sting of the disinfectant that followed was almost comforting in its familiarity, and he closed his eyes, dozing off lightly. She worked in silence. They never did give enough credit to the Joys, though Ash idly. Sure, they looked sweet and spoke softly, but they could be dangerously protective when they needed to be, and incredibly talented with medicine, always. She finished wrapping gauze down his arm and patted his chest softly. "All done now, honey," she prompted, and he opened his eyes reluctantly. "Is anything else hurting beside your arm?" Well, some things sure were, but not enough for him to mention. "No," he replied, and he pulled himself up to a sitting position. "Thanks, Nurse Joy. I'll be fine, now." She eyed him for a moment before sighing. "Well, if you're sure." "I am. How are the others? My Pokémon and Lucario?" He gnawed on his lip while Nurse Joy hesitated. They all were extremely exhausted. She ended up saying, "Hungry, and thirsty, and low on energy. You're Swellow." Ash swallowed thickly. Remembered the pain in Swellow's eyes. "It will be okay. They all need lots of rest, I'm sure you understand. I couldn't find a Pokeball on you for the Lucario, though. I put it under induced sleep for now, so it can recover in peace." Ash nodded tiredly. "Yeah, Lucario isn't mine. It's my good friend, though. Thank you for helping all of them, and me." "Of course," she replied, and her smile reminded Ash of his mom. Or maybe of Professor Burnett. Ash took a shaky breath. "Could I rent a room?" he asked hesitantly. "I mean, I don't have any money on me right now, but I can pay you back later, just for one night, anyway." Her eyes widened as she shook her head swiftly. "Oh dear no, you won't have to pay." Then, she leaned a bit closer, her voice lowering as concern took hold of her gaze. "Can I ask, were you attacked? Are you safe?" Ash got startled by the question. He had no idea how to answer to it though, since he clearly wasn't safe, but he didn't think he was in any immediate danger, either. "You don't gotta worry about me," he eventually said, brushing a tired hand through his dirty hair. He settled on a light, somewhat believable lie, and added, "It was just some wild Pokémon. We got a bit too close to a Spearo's nest and, you know how they can be." Nurse Joy gasped in horror. "Oh, you need to be more careful. A Spearow attack is no joke." "Yeah," muttered Ash, and suddenly he missed Pikachu again, so hard it hurt. He closed his eyes, fighting back tears. "Oh, sweetheart," said Nurse Joy softly. After a quiet minute, she started gathering away the first aid kit and said, "You go have a shower in your room now. Okay. Come back to the lobby when you're done, and I'll bring you some food. You look like you really need it." Ash blinked, his eyes open. No other string of sentences had ever sounded as good to him as those right then. They had struggled about halfway through one lesson when Kukui decided enough was enough. He set down his chalk and addressed his class. "Listen, how about we try some battle training instead? I think we all need a little break." The answer was loudly unanimous, and the gray-faced Ash, who'd been staring at his textbook like it was laced with poison or worse, lit up like bonfire, bouncing excitedly on his seat. Kiave grinned viciously, shooting a glance at his old new rival. "That's a great idea, Professor," he said, still staring at Ash, and it sounded like a challenge. Ash's smile was as fiery as his. "Oh yeah, sounds great." "Well, I for sure can't wait to see how this'll go," Mallow said to Lana in a stage whisper, and the other sniggered behind her hand. "I'm interested to see how differently you battle, Ash," said Lily softly. "Not having all of your memories, it must be tough." Ash rubbed the back of his neck, shrugging awkwardly. But I do have all my memories, you know. I'm just way too far in the future right now." He poked at his temple, indicating the mind swap that was apparently going on, and fixed a pointed stare at Lily. Kukui hated he still couldn't think that sentence through without the apparently. "Sure, pal," snorted Sophocles in good humor. "And that isn't a weird thing to say at all, huh?" Ash frowned, snapped, "Hey, I'm not weird. What, do you think I'm lying?" Sophocles' eyes widened, and he raised his hands up, leaning back. "Whoa, of course not. Sorry, Ash." He glanced around, looking for help. When no one offered, he went on, "But you know, you gotta admit this is strange, right? A little bit scary and weird?" "It's not such a big deal," grumbled Ash, crossing his arms tightly. "I'm fine, and I'm sure I'll go back to Kanto soon, and then you'll get your Ash back." Kukui hated where this was going, and he cleared his throat desperately. "Hey, maybe we should." "Back to Kanto," blurted Mallow, jumping up from her chair. "The last thing you remember was in Kanto. Like, were you just home with your mom and Professor Oak?" "No, I was." Ash sat up straighter, confusion mixing into the annoyed look on his face. "Hold on, you know Professor Oak?" "We all do," Ash said Kiave. "We visited his farm last year. And you had an epic battle against Misty, too." "You know Misty?" yelped Ash. "Man, I hope she managed to sort out her gym." "Misty is awesome," was Lana's helpful input. "Oh yay, she's badass," agreed Mallow empathically. "I really enjoyed visiting Kanto, actually. It was such a nice trip, and it gave me so many good ideas for the restaurant, too." "That Mega Gyarados," muttered Lana dreamily. "Wow." Kukui clasped his hands together loudly, drawing his class's fickle attention to him for a second. "Right, everyone, grab a pen and a notepad, and follow me. Let's have a little walk around the area first, and then we can find a nice place to try some moves. I'm sure Ash is excited to try his first Z move." This, finally, got the kids moving, and their loud shuffling and chatter helped to drown out worst of the distressed buzz between Kukui's temples. They toured around the school grounds first, and Kukui started to get the weirdest feeling someone was watching them. He glanced down from the balcony, and though he saw someone stepping back to hide behind the fence. He paused to explain how the cafeteria worked but couldn't help glancing out of the big windows every once in a while, expecting to see someone looking in. He showed the class around the Tauros racetrack, and could swear someone was standing in the forest, a faint shadowy shape just out of sight. It made his skin crawl. And the worst thing about it was, he wasn't sure if it was just a product of his anxiety over the situation or if he should have been getting concerned for real. He got other things to worry about, though, when he followed his class out of the school grounds and onto the path leading to the city. The road was blocked by a group of reporters, and they homed in on Ash the moment they saw him like swarm of very curious bees. "Mr. Ketchum, a few words." Ash Ketchum, the fresh Alola champion and the winner of yesterday's exhibition match against the notorious Masked Royal. "Tell us, how are you feeling right now?" "Champion Ash, what are your plans for next year's league? Are you planning on incorporating the Island Challenge into the participation qualifications?" There were half a dozen cameras and microphones pointed at him, and Ash stood there in the middle of it, wide-eyed, mouth half open like he wanted to say something but couldn't for the life of him figure out what. Kukui elbowed his way through the crowd, feeling way angrier than he probably should have. "Excuse me," he snapped, voice cold as ice, stepping half in front of Ash. "I won't allow you to harass my student in the middle of a school day. Please, turn off your cameras and let us pass." "Kukui, my man," said an all too familiar voice to his left, "chill out, will you? It's a huge day for Alola, and for you, too. The league was your baby, right? That's a big deal, man." Kukui whipped his head around, his shoulders tensing under his lab coat. "Manu," he said, voice flat. He hadn't seen him through the crowd at first, but now he could spot the small round man with his obnoxious flowery shirt and his annoying flashy little sunglasses. Kukui's blood pressure was instantly through the roof, and it was only the cameras pointed at him that stopped him from doing something rash. Manu was a local sports reporter that had been keeping track of the Masked Royal for years now, and Kukui knew him to be a bold and nosy bastard who didn't cut corners trying to find out everything about the person he was interested in at any given time. Kukui himself had had a fair share of his unwanted attention over the years. He really didn't need him to get interested in Ash right now. "What's the problem here?" asked Manu sweetly. "We at Sports and Pokemon only got Ash for a few minutes after the finale, and there's been basically no interviews given for anyone yet, nothing proper, you get me? The people demand to hear more about their new champion, Kukui. Is that so hard to understand?" Kukui inhaled sharply, trying to tone down his building irritation. "As I just told you," he replied, carefully pronouncing every word, staring down Manu. "I am not allowing any interviews or filming during school hours. Besides, I expect you all to respect the boundaries and privacy of the champion, and not approach him like this ever again. I'm sure we will be in contact should we wish to take part in an interview." Most of the reporters looked like they were reconsidering their actions, and few of the cameras turned off and lowered, but Manu was still pushing his mic to Kukui's face, smiling arrogantly. Well, you seem quite protective of young Mr. Ketchum, Professor Kukui. Are the rumors true, after all? Did you truly throw the exhibition match so your favorite student could win?" That caught Kukui off guard so hard he couldn't say anything for a second, just staring at the man in offended horror. Rationally, he knew Manu had said it just to rile him up, but it worked, all too well. Nothing vexed Kukui more than the theory floating around implying that he had rigged the match, or even the whole league, in Ash's favor. Like Ash, the strange, foreign Ash, couldn't have won the tournament on his own merits. "Professor?" asked Ash from his side, and Kukui's heart leapt into his throat. "Don't say anything, yes, champion," pushed Manu, speaking over Kukui. "Do you have anything to say about these rumors? I'm sure it stings to hear these awful things said about your victory." No comment. Ash had crossed his arms, an annoyed look set on his face as he eyed the reporter. "I dunno what you're talking about, but you're kinda pissing me off. I just want to go practice Z moves with Kiave and the others, so I think you should go away now." Kukui coughed, startled, and turned to stare at the boy. Manu's grin just widened. "Ooh, snappy. I like you. Hey, would I say we book us a time for a proper interview? How's tomorrow sound?" Kukui rose to his full height, his voice an irritable growl as he said, "No, Manu. You won't do that. Now, fuck off before I break your camera, or worse." Manu laughed, loud and coarse, but he did indicate his assistant to lower the camera as he himself put the microphone down. All right, he chuckled, pushing his sunglasses up the sweaty bridge of his nose. "I hit a sore spot, I get it. No need to get aggressive, pal. Anyway, have a nice day at school, Mr. Ketchum. I'm sure we'll see each other later." Ignoring Kukui's murderous glare, he walked off, and the rest of the reporters that had been following the exchange like a tennis match scattered off too, one by one. "Whoa, Professor, what was that?" asked Sophocles into the stunned silence. "What a creep," muttered Lana. "You okay, Ash?" Mallow asked Ash, and Ash huffed something in reply. Kukui barely heard them. He was staring after the last group of reporters, a deep frown on his face. One of the men there, the tall one with the long curly hair, he didn't recognize him. And Kukui had a rather good handle on the local media personnel, for obvious reasons. So who was he? Whatever, It didn't matter now, Kukui supposed. He took a deep breath, relaxing his posture deliberately. Manu might turn out to be a problem, but he was only a single man. Kukui would just have to do everything he could to keep him away from the ash inside a champion's body. "Hey, can we go now?" whined the ash in question, staring up at him expectantly, and Kukui was so done with the absurdity of it all that he just laughed, unsteadily, closing his eyes for a second. "Yeah, sure, we can go now." They found themselves on the clear patch in the forest where Ash and Tapu Koko had faced off the first time, all that time ago. Kukui hung back, still feeling unsettled by the run-in with the media, and watched as Kiave attempted to teach Ash to do the pose for the electric Z move. "Not like that," he groaned, grabbing Ash's wrists and twisting them in the right positions forcefully. "More like this, okay?" Ash nodded, shook his body in preparation, and took the pose again, in a completely wrong way. Kiave rubbed the bridge of his nose, muttering, "But you were so natural before." "Man, I don't really get it," said Ash, frowning in frustration. "Can't I just try the move now? I'm sure I'll figure out all this other stuff better like that." "How would you?" Kiave started, exasperated, but paused then. He thought for a second and then backpedaled. "Actually, that's true. You figured it out all by yourself the last time. Maybe that's a good idea." "Yeah," cheered Ash, grinning at Pikachu. "You ready, buddy?" "Pika. All right, so this is how it works," Kiave began, clasping his hand on Turtonator's arm. "Z moves require a strong bond between the Pokémon and its trainer. It's only when the hearts of those two become one that the Z move gets its full power. And not just anyone is allowed to use Z moves, either. That's why the Island Challenge is there, to test the trainer and to determine if they deserve to hold this sacred power." "Deserve to hold the power," repeated Ash, a blank look washing over his features. Kiave smiled. "Don't worry, you'll get it, eventually. Anyway, let's have this battle, then. Remember, you can only execute one Z move per battle, and they drain a lot of energy from you and your partner, so use it carefully." "Fine," said Ash, excitement taking hold of him. "Let's have a battle." They took their positions facing each other, and Ash sent out Pikachu while Kiave indicated Turtonator to move forward. Kukui walked to where the rest of the class was watching the exchange, intrigued despite himself. From the viewpoint of a Pokémon professor, this could turn out to be an exceptionally unique thing to witness. The battle was quite balanced at first, like Kiave and Ash's often were. The turning point came when Ash called out the move Thunder, and it got Pikachu faltering, confused. Turtonator took the change to hit it with a flamethrower, and Pikachu was sent flying, yelling in pain. "Pikachu!" Ash yelped. Pikachu was okay, but it threw a withering glare back at Ash, snapping something seething to him. Ash stared at it, the surprise clear on his face before it morphed into amazement. "You learned a new move?" he asked, excited. "Show me." Pikachu turned back to the fight, dodging Turtonator's dragon tail and building up Electro Web, throwing it at its opponent. Turtonator got trapped under the web, and Ash shouted, "Whoa, amazing Pikachu. That's so cool." "Focus, Ash," chided Kiave, but he was grinning too, pumped up by the battle. "Use this chance to build up your Z move." Ash jumped. "Oh, right." He looked at Pikachu, his posture slightly unsure. "Right. Pi-Ka Pikachu." Pikachu whipped its tail from side to side a few times, crouching down in front of him. "Pika-Chu." "Right," said Ash, firmer now. "All right, here we go, let's go with our full power." Kukui watched as he took the position, perfectly correctly this time, and the energy between him and Pikachu activated, glowing bright in the flickering shadows of the forest. Kukui held his breath, excited to see how it would go. The energy built and built, and Pikachu was trembling with it until... Suddenly, Pikachu let out a startled whine, and Kukui saw all the color draining from Ash's face, the boy's eyes going hazy and distant and his face twisting in anguish. He dropped to his knees, his arms curling around his body. Pikachu, still staggering from the aborted Z move, rushed to its trainer's side and nudged his leg, chirping softly. Kukui shook himself out of his shock and ran to Ash as well, leaning down to look at him properly. "Ash. What happened? What's wrong?" Ash had his fingers curled around a broken Z crystal, and his face was sweaty and sallow, like he was about to be sick. He looked up at Kukui, something terrible in his eyes. I remembered what was happening before. His voice faded, almost down to nothing. It was like, when we were trying to save Mew. It felt like that. And Lucario. He swallowed thickly, eyes moist with unshed tears. I think, Lucario might be dead. Then, Sinnoh, the room was quiet and dark when he entered it. Ash left a pile of Nurse Joy's spare clothes on the bed and stripped his own into a dirty heap on the carpet. He shuffled into the tiny bathroom and paused by the mirror over the sink. Stared at his own face he barely recognized. He scratched off a dried flake of blood from the corner of his red-rimmed eyes, pursing his lips thoughtfully. No wonder Nurse Joy had been so concerned. He looked like utter crap. He tore his eyes off the mirror and stepped into the shower. He stayed under the too hot water, feeling only half there, until he wasn't shivering anymore, and until the water that flowed into the drain was no longer dirty red and brown. The towel in the bathroom was almost as soft and fluffy as the one Professor Kukui had given him back at home, and he buried his face in it for a moment, inhaling the faint scent of detergent and perfume. And it smelled nothing like Alola did, so Ash quickly abandoned it on the drying rack and moved back into the main room. Nurse Joy had very kindly loaned him some of her own old clothes that, as she'd put it, she kept at the center just for cases like this, where a trainer was in desperate need of a change of clothes. It was a little weird pulling them on, but they were comfy, Ash had to admit. Soon, he was clad in slightly oversized gray sweatpants, a worn blue merch t-shirt featuring the famous Sinnoh Lakeside Resort and a soft, chancy pink hoodie with a broken zipper. He stared down at his old clothes for a moment and sighed. They were way beyond saving, unfortunately. After a brief consideration, he dumped the entire pile into the trash can. He ignored the weird empty feeling the action left behind, and walked out of the room, determined to not think about anything. He'd just get food, eat, go to bed, and sleep, and only then would he be allowed to think, to feel. "Oh, you look a lot better," Nurse Joy called from the front desk, and Ash smiled at her. "Yeah. Thank you for the clothes." He trudged through the empty lobby, carefully stepping over the drying bloodstains he'd left on the floor. Nurse Joy had set up a glass of water and some bread on one of the cafeteria tables by the window, and Ash sat gingerly on the sofa adjacent to it. Nurse Joy came up to him with a steaming bowl of something that smelled amazing, and said, "Sorry, the kitchen is closed for the night, but I warmed up some tomato soup for you. It's not much, but—" "No, it's great," Ash replied emphatically, reaching for the bowl. "Thank you." "Oh," she folded her hands in front of her, and there was sadness in her smile that Ash didn't quite understand. "Well, I hope you'll like it, and take your time, I'll just go tidy things up before the morning shift gets here." Ash winced, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," but she just waved her hand in dismissal and strode off, leaving Ash alone with his bowl of soup and his misplaced guilt. It took him a long time to finish the bowl. Between feeling faintly ill and almost nodding off every couple of seconds, he was so out of it that he didn't notice the man walking into the lobby until he was standing right next to him. "Hey kid, you okay?" Ash startled so badly he almost spilled the drink he'd been idly holding all over the brightly colored tabletop. He looked up, eyes wide, heart thrumming in his ears. But he was even more surprised when he realized he knew the young man speaking to him. "Kellen?" he blankly said, staring at the top ranger. Kellen's eyes narrowed and he leaned against the table, looming over Ash. He spoke quietly, "How do you know my name?" Only then did Ash realize his mistake. His shoulders twitched nervously, and he stammered, "I dunno. I guess we met somewhere." Kellen didn't look convinced, and his eyes searched Ash up and down. "I guess we did, then," he replied after a beat. "What's your name again?" Ash blinked at him, his head empty of anything besides the pounding headache behind his eyes. He didn't know if he should lie or not, if it even mattered. They hadn't met with Kellen yet, no in this timeline, and he didn't know if, well, whatever. It'd probably be easier to just lie than explain all this. He choked out, "I'm, Tom?" He bit the inside of his cheek as Kellen cocked his eyebrow, asking, "Tom?" Yeah, Tom Otto. That's me." Kellen stared at him for a moment longer, until suddenly he smiled. His stance relaxed, and he slid into the booth opposite of Ash. "Well, Tom," he began, folding his empty hands on the table. "I'm just here to check up on you. You see, I was staying the night here and just now Nurse Joy came to tell me that a kid with a bunch of injured Pokemon arrived here. A kid who apparently got attacked and has no money, no backpack and no friends with him. Ash nodded mutely, and Kellen raised his eyebrows in a silent question. Ash shrugged helplessly. Yeah, that's me, I guess. The ranger leaned his chin on his hand, eyes intense. Spiro. Was it? Huh? Kellen's brow rose even further. That attacked you? Ash jumped, remembering the haphazard lie he'd came up with earlier for Nurse Joy. Oh, he quickly nodded once, and then a couple more times for emphasis. Yeah, Spiro. Kellen's lips twitched, and Ash wondered if he'd been convincing enough. That's not good, then, the man said thoughtfully. I wasn't aware there was an aggressive nest nearby. And I should know, I'm the ranger responsible for this area after all. Ash swallowed, his fingers curling against his sweaty palms. His head hurt, he really needed to sleep. Kellen went on, you happen to remember where the nest was? I might go check it out tomorrow. Ash shook his head shakily. And no, sorry, it was pretty dark, and I got really lost out there, I'm sorry. Don't be, Kellen said, and he leaned back against the sofa, the look in his eyes softening somewhat. Were you all alone, then? You're not traveling with anyone? Well, just Lucario. And my Pokemon, Ash replied through an involuntary yawn. He rubbed his eyes until he saw spots. They're all resting with Nurse Joy now, though. Kellen sat up straighter, a curious frown settling on his face. That Lucario, it isn't yours. It was weird. Ash trusted Kellen. They were friends in the future and all, but he still couldn't help feeling uncomfortable when talking about Lucario. He fidgeted while he admitted, no, it's just a friend. Kellen nodded. It's wild, then. No, it's, Ash bit his lip before he could blurt out anything else. He eyed Kellen for a second, a budding feeling of mistrust weighing heavily in his chest. Why was he suddenly so interested about Lucario? They weren't that uncommon in Sinnoh, right? Did he know something Ash didn't? What was going on? When it became obvious Ash wasn't going to continue, Kellen relented, raising his palms up. Tell you what, Tom, don't worry about it right now. He smiled, and his friendly grin was framed by sharp eyes. Let's talk more in the morning, yeah? You seem exhausted. I sure am, mumbled Ash. He stood up, his shaky hand hitting the empty plates on the table, clattering them all over. He winced at the noise, said, it was nice seeing you, Kellen. I guess I'll see you later. Yeah. Kellen's gaze followed him as he stumbled out of the booth. Their eyes met, and Kellen said, quietly, if you're in danger, you can tell me. I'll do anything I can to help, okay? If there's someone after you. Ash stared at him, eyes wide. Kellen sat back again, the look on his face grave. Hey, it's okay. Have a good rest. I'll be waiting for you here. Painful tightness grasped Ash's chest and his eyes suddenly burned. He inhaled unsteadily, and it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Clenching his jaw, he turned on his heels and quickly walked away, all the way to his room. He leaned against the closed door, breathing thinly. He pressed his palms against his eyes, forcing down the impending panic. Get food, eat, go to bed, sleep. Go to bed, sleep. He repeated it in his head, all the way to the bed. He fell on the covers, face first, and was out in seconds. An indefinite time later, his eyes shot open. He found himself in a lush forest, lying next to a quietly sizzling campfire. He sat up slowly, feeling yesterday's training in his sore muscles. Did you have a good sleep? He turned his head and saw Sir Aaron, sitting in just his undershirt, polishing his staff. I did, thank you. It was his voice, echoing in their minds. Wait. No, it was Lucario's voice. Ash realized then, this was a dream. Lucario's dream. Aaron, even ruffled and dressed down as he was, looked imposing in Lucario's eyes. I'm glad. You worked so hard yesterday, Lucario. You are improving fast. I think you'll put even me to shame, soon. Do not joke, master. I am nowhere near your level. Aaron laughed. Always so humble. He gazed at Lucario with warm eyes. Hey, what do you say we take a little trip, soon? Ash felt Lucario tipping its head curiously. A trip, master? Yeah. I'm thinking Sinnoh. Did you know that's where you are from, originally? You came to Kanto when you were just a little pup, but your roots, your family, they're not from here. Ash could hear the wonder in Lucario's tone. My family? Aaron grinned, wide and bright and joyful. That's right, so, what do you think? Should we go? Lucario was smiling too, Ash knew. He could feel the excitement bubbling in its chest. I would love to, Aaron. He woke up to sharp sunlight and even sharper pain. Ash groaned, curling around his arm that pulsed with bouts of pain, and cracked his eyes open gingerly. For a blissful minute, he forgot where he was, why he was there, and just sleepily stared at the pastel yellow wallpaper in front of him. He didn't remember the wall to be that color in Kukui's home. Rolling onto his back, he stared at the white, unfamiliar ceiling. A frown settled on his face, and he took a deep breath, forcing himself back to reality. Lucario. Pikachu. Hunter J. Kellen. Ash sat up, ignoring the lightheaded feeling that instantly struck him, and scrambled off the bed. No time to laze around. He needed to see his Pokémon. He needed to make sure Lucario was okay. He was still fully dressed in Nurse Joy's clothes, so he just brushed a hand down his front, attempting to smooth down the worst of the wrinkles. Then, he reached up, flattened his hair and desperately tried to get it back into sorts, but it was a lost fight. He huffed, half frustrated, half amused, and walked back into the lobby. He spotted Kellen sitting by the window, the ranger's eyes following him intently, but Ash ignored him for the sake of going to the front desk and calling for Nurse Joy. She rounded the corner, a tired smile lighting up her face when she saw him. Oh, good morning, she called. Tom, right? She had a tray of Pokeballs with her, and Ash stood up straighter, eyes fixated on them. Absently, he responded, what? I mean, yeah, are those? Nurse Joy nodded, setting down the tray. Your Pokémon are fully healed. Let me just fetch the Lucario. She walked away, and Ash jerked forward, hastily gathering the Pokeballs and fixing them back to his belt. He sighed deeply, a heavy weight leaving his shoulders. He places his hand over the Pokeballs, feeling them thrumming with life under his fingers. They were safe. They were okay. Nurse Joy was back in few minutes, a sleepy-looking Lucario trailing behind her. Lucario! Ash yelped, and the Pokémon rushed forward, grasping his hands with its paws. Its touch warmed up his whole body, his aura raising its head as it sensed Lucario's presence. Their eyes met, and there was a silent question in Lucario's gaze. Can we trust them? Ash glanced towards Kellen, who was still openly staring at him. Ash shifted, uncomfortable, moving himself between the ranger and Lucario. He said, hushed, let's talk more in my room, okay? Lucario nodded, eyes blazing, and from behind them Nurse Joy chirped, would you boys like some breakfast? It's on the house? A full plate of eggs and bacon later, Ash was feeling a lot more human again. He had sat down with Lucario into the furthest booth away from Kellen and the few rare other trainers in the lobby, and Kellen had seemed happy enough so far to just observe them from distance. Ash knew it wouldn't last, though, not for long, and he dreaded the moment he'd have to face some truths again. Right now, he was happy enough like this, together with Lucario, concealed in their own little bubble of breakfast food and a reassuring feeling of trust founded on shared trauma. Well, it didn't sound that healthy when he actually thought about it. He slammed his fork down onto the table, sitting up suddenly. I gotta call Brock and the others, he stated, the need to see them, to hear their voices, striking him with the power and swiftness of Pikachu's thunderbolt. He looked around and spotted a phone close by, and abandoning the remains of his food he quickly shuffled up to it. Lucario followed him, brow furrowing with questions left unsaid. Ash stared at the phone. He muttered, under his breath, man, where do you think they are, even? How long's it even been? I did tell them to come to Sinnoh, right? Lucario stayed silent. Its guess was as good as his, Ash supposed. That is, there wasn't one. He almost jumped out of his shoes as the phone abruptly started ringing with an unknown caller ID flashing on the screen. Ash took few uncertain steps back, glancing around to see if there was someone there looking like they were waiting for a call. The only one he saw was Kellen, who had finally slid out of his booth and was striding towards him with purpose. I think you should answer that phone, he told Ash, an amused look making the corners of his mouth twitch upwards. Ash turned back to the phone, and then back to Kellen again, his heart suddenly pounding. Who is it? Kellen came to a stop a courteous distance away from him. Only one way to find out, yeah. Sure. I guess so. Tentatively, he pushed the accept call button, and the screen filled up with faces he least expected, but most wanted to see. There, a bit rough around the edges but otherwise looking okay, stood Brock, May, and Max, and behind them. "Hey, Ash," exclaimed Brock. "We finally found you." "Ash, no way," called Max, jumping up and down and waving frantically. "So good to see you, Ash," said May, her arms tightly wrapped around Pikachu's petrified form. "Are you okay? We were so worried." "Whoa, hey, guys," Ash was too stunned with relief to really do anything else than to stare at them, not believing his luck. "Yeah, I'm all right," he added, his voice strangely rough all of a sudden. His legs felt like noodles, and he swayed, leaning closer to the screen like that would somehow bring him closer to his friends. And through all of it, he couldn't stop glancing at the familiar man standing behind them, with his pink hair and his cape and all. Ash shook his head, blinking. What was Lance doing here? They were silent for most of the walk back home. Ash had insisted he was fine, and then refused to talk about anything that had happened. Kukui, as much as he hated himself for it, was too afraid of the repercussions to break the fragile trust between them and start demanding answers from him. It hit hard to see Ash vulnerable like that, and it hurt even more to have no idea how to help. So he just stayed close, and kept his eyes on Ash. Ash had Pikachu in his arms, and his shoulders were hunched over it, his head down and lips moving almost silently. Kukui breathed in slowly, his world fading out of focus as he concentrated on Ash's voice. "You remember Lucario, right?" Ash mumbled into Pikachu's ear, and the Pokémon twitched slightly in confirmation. "What happened to it?" Pikachu's eyes were big and dark as it looked up at Ash. "Pika Pika Pikachu," it murmured, paws curling against its chest. Ash huffed, face twisting in frustration. "But we know that's not true. Pikachu Pika, Pikachu." "Yeah, of course I remember what Brock said." His voice was rising, and he threw an anxious glare over his shoulder, eyeing Kukui for a second before turning back to Pikachu. "But that makes no sense, anyway. If it died, and you remember me being there right after," he bit his lip, exhaling sharply. "But I wasn't there, right? I am not there. It's gotta be Mew. It did something big. Maybe it changed what happened, too, to Lucario, and it survived." Pikachu stayed silent, and even Kukui could tell its heart was breaking for its trainer. "If you knew, then, why didn't you tell me?" Ash's voice cracked, and Kukui almost walked straight into him as he suddenly stopped walking, standing deathly still in the middle of the path. Pikachu replied something, softly, and Ash's jaw clenched furiously. "It wasn't a long time ago for me, though, Pika Pika." "Well, maybe you don't care about it anymore, but I do." The words rang loud in the quiet forest, and Kukui could hardly breathe in the stifling silence they left behind. "Pikapi." Pikachu twisted in his grip, its whole being bristling dangerously, and Ash dropped it like it was burning hot. He took half a step back, and Pikachu stood in front of him, tail pointed at the sky. "Chu Pika. Pika, Pikapi." "What?" He stared at Pikachu, and Pikachu, unfaltering, stared back. Ash grimaced, his arms dropping to his sides as his shoulders slumped. He muttered, "Crap, I'm sorry," and Pikachu relaxed as well, its gaze still fixed at Ash but the look on its face softer, now. "I'm sorry, I know you care," said Ash. He inhaled, shaky and wheezy, like his lungs were resisting the mere act of breathing. "I just." "Pika, Ash?" asked Kukui carefully, catching Ash's gaze, and the plain grief in his eyes made Kukui stagger. Ash's jaw worked as his hands balled into fists. He looked away, down, face shaded by his cap. "I really messed up this time, didn't I?" He exhaled shallowly. There was an edge of a grim smile on his lips, and Kukui leapt into action. "Ash, hey, look at me. It's okay. Take a deep breath and try to calm down." He stepped closer, arms spread at his sides. Ash huffed out a laugh, his shoulders bunching up, tense and wary. "I'm calm," he said, too fast and too sharp for it to be nowhere near the truth. "I'm fine. I feel fine." His breathing was picking up, and his eyes bounced between Kukui and Pikachu, and he backed off slowly with a seemingly unintentional movement. Like a trapped animal, with nowhere to escape, finally confronted by his predator. Kukui cursed silently as realization hit him. He had thought about that same thing just that morning. How something was wrong with Ash, how he reacted to the world around him like everything could be a possible threat. Like he was powerless within a deep ocean that had just swallowed him whole. It twisted Kukui's stomach something sharp. Ash was, and had been the whole time, truly, awfully afraid. Afraid for this Lucario, afraid for his friends and his life he'd been ripped away from, afraid for himself. But if Ash ever was anything, thought Kukui gravely, he was resilient, and if he didn't want to acknowledge his fear, if he wanted to just ignore the helplessness and go with the flow enough, there was no way anyone was stopping him. Until, that is, something within him would break harshly enough to bring it all to surface. You're not fine, Ash. You probably haven't even realized it yourself, but you're in survival mode, he said to Ash, forcing his voice to not waver. Have been, for a long time. You were going through a traumatic experience, and then you were pulled into this other reality, almost, where nothing is familiar to you. That would make anyone to go into shock. He paused, just long enough to search Ash's face for any kind of reaction. The boy stared back at him, denial a hollow shade on him. I'm fine, he repeated, his brow tightening as his voice gained an angry edge. Kukui shook his head softly. Your body and your mind are doing everything they can to keep you sane. Whatever it was that was happening over there, he said, and observed as all remaining color drained from Ash's face, it still hasn't left you. Yeah, you're physically here, but your subconscious is still there, fighting, trying to survive. Ash folded his arms in front of him, tightly, the tips of his fingers digging into his skin as he glared up at Kukui. I don't really care about all that stuff, he said tersely. About my brain or my subconscious or whatever. I just want to know if Lucario, and Mew, and all the others are okay. He stared at Pikachu, who looked back at him silently. Pikachu's gotta be wrong. He added then, quietly. It said I was there, when Lucario died. It says it doesn't remember everything, like some of the things that happened are hazy, but that it knows Lucario's dead. He trailed off, voice rough. He glanced at Kukui, almost hopefully. It makes no sense, right? And what do you say to that? Kukui worried his lip, stepping closer to Ash again, and this time the kid didn't back off. I don't know, Ash, he ended up admitting, waving his hand apologetically. I'm sorry. I don't really understand what's happened to you. You have to explain it to me, starting from the beginning. Starting from who this Lucario was. Said Ash, before tightly shutting his mouth. I mean. He uncrossed and crossed his arms again, fidgety all of a sudden. Kukui breathed in deeply, watching him. At least the hostility was gone. You don't have to tell me right now, said Kukui quietly. We can go home. You can try to rest for a bit, sleep if you can, and then, when you're ready, you can tell me about Lucario. Does that sound okay? Ash nodded, and with the slightest indication he got Pikachu to jump onto his shoulder again. We can do that, he said, looking at Pikachu. Yeah. Great, said Kukui, but the enthusiasm in his voice was thin and uncertain. He turned to walk again, smiling at Ash over his shoulder. Come on, let's go home. Burnett was waiting for them on the porch when they arrived. She jumped up, opening the front door and ushering them in a controlled kind of hurry. Kukui raised his eyebrows at her in a silent question, and she marched to the kitchen counter, leaned against it, and crossed her arms. We had some visitors here, she said. She was tense, fuming with traces of anger. Manu and his gang, and some others. They were looking for you. Oh yeah? Said Kukui. He watched from the corner of his eye as Ash released all his Pokemon and busied himself with them, showering them with overflowing affection. I can't take it with Manu, said Burnett. He's just so, what an asshole. He's going all in with the conflict of interest theory, right? You gotta be really careful, Kukui. I know, said Kukui. He sighed, all the built-up energy and tension leaving his body in a huff as he slumped against the counter next to Burnett. He felt exhausted, run down to bare bones. They caught us, earlier, when we were leaving school grounds. Burnett looked appalled. Really? That's outrageous. But, you were with Ash, right? He wasn't alone? Kukui nodded. Burnett snaked her arm around his, and they watched Ash getting roughed up by Incineroar as they played tag around the living room. "Yeah, I was there," said Kukui. He felt embarrassed, thinking about the encounter now. "I don't think I was much of a help, though. I got really angry, Burnett. I said some things I probably shouldn't have." Burnett was quiet for a while. "I said some things too," she said after a minute. "He has this way of making you just so incredibly pissed off that you forget to watch your words. But I guess that's what makes him so successful." Kukui chuckled humorlessly. "For sure. His way, it's offensive and dangerous, but it gets results. And we need to be prepared to counter that. When it was just about me, about the Masked Royal, it was easier. But when it's about Ash, I didn't even know I could feel that kind of fury," said Burnett. "The protective anger I felt when he started putting down Ash's achievements, accusing you of." She looked down, where her hands were balled into fists. "He got to me good. He knows which strings he needs to pull." "What did he want from you?" asked Kukui. "I guess he was disappointed when he didn't find Ash here." "Oh, he was disappointed all right," said Burnett, her brow tightening as she followed Ash with her gaze. "He tried to demand where Ash was, where you were. And I had few selected words to say about him coming to my house and harassing Ash like that. He, in turn, had a lot to say about you." "He's trying to push us off balance," said Kukui, "and it's working." Burnett looked up at him, mouth curling unhappily. "You know what he said about you? He said you're volatile, unpredictable, that you hold many secrets, and you hold them well. He said, because you hid your secret identity so perfectly, and for so long, it means it couldn't have been the only secret you have." Kukui bit his tongue, not saying what he wanted to say, acutely aware of Ash and his team in the room. Burnett turned her head away, her voice lowering to a murmur. "I told him to fuck off, after that. Like husband, like wife," Kukui supposed. "I love you," said Kukui, because it was the only thing he had energy for, anymore. Burnett's lips twitched. "I love you too." The next few hours found Ash snoozing on the sofa in a big pile of fur and paws, and Burnett and Kukui quietly drinking chamomile tea. "It helps with your nerves," said Burnett, in the far corner of the space. "Who else was with Manu?" asked Kukui, grimacing after one sip of his tea. He hated chamomile tea. "There were few others. I guess he'd collected them to come with him to seem more intimidating, since no one else was even talking. But it was pretty much the basic crowd you'd expect. You saw them too, didn't you?" "Yeah, I did. But there was this one guy the first didn't recognize." Kukui glanced out of the window, the same uncomfortable feeling creeping over him, like someone was watching them. "He was with Johnson, you know, from Alola's Star?" he continued. "Tall, long hair, kinda regal looking with his fancy outfit. No way he was local." Burnett looked at him blankly. "I think I would remember someone like that," she said. "No, I only saw Johnson and that mousy cameraman of hers." "That's odd," said Kukui, peeking out of the window again. He had a sudden urge to close the curtains, even though they never did that. "I think something strange is going on, Burnett." She cocked her eyebrow in disbelief. "You think?" Kukui squared his shoulders. "Something else than what's going on with Ash. That guy, he was odd. He stood out, but at the same time he was gone before I got a good look at him. And at the school, I had this feeling we were being watched." Burnett gnawed on her lip for a moment. She reached out and took Kukui's hand into her own. "You're just stressed, honey. That's all. Why would anyone do that? The reporters, they may be assholes, but even they won't stoop down to stalking. And there's no way anyone knows about what happened to Ash, right?" Kukui wanted to feel offended, but he was too realistic for that. Even he knew he probably sounded pretty crazy. It can't be just me," he said. "I can't really describe it, the feeling I got. But, well." He sighed, waving his hand. "Anyway, I'll drop it for now. Maybe I'm being overly anxious." "And I'll promise to keep my eyes open," said Burnett, humoring him. She looked fondly in Ash's direction, thought the boy was barely visible under all his Pokémon. He seemed to be sleeping soundly. "I noticed you came home early today," she said quietly. "How did the day go?" "It was fine," said Kukui. "Everything went really well, until it didn't." He shared a somber look with Burnett, continued. "Something happened when Ash tried to perform his Z move. It triggered something in him, a memory, or something he'd repressed. It was like it physically hurt him. He couldn't continue with the move. I've never seen anything like it. Did he tell you what happened? Asked Bernd, concerned. Kukui shook his head. He's being so vague about it. Something bad happened, or was happening, to him just before he got here. There's a Lucario involved, and Pikachu seems to be sure that Lucario is dead, now. And Ash refuses to accept it. Arceus. Burnett whispered. Her face was pale, drawn. Poor boy. What the hell is going on? He said he can tell me more about it later, after he's had time to rest. I'm kinda scared, to be honest, Burnett. Hearing all that, it'll make this all very real. Burnett's fingers tightened around his. Just do your best. That's all you can do right now. Just being there for him. Kukui looked down, anxiety curling his stomach into a tight knot. I just wish I could do more for him. I know, said Burnett, and she exhaled wearily, leaned her head against his collarbone. So do I. Then, Sinnoh, Lance, yelped Ash. Hey, Ash, said Lance, saluting him sloppily. Didn't expect to see you so soon. Wah, what are you doing here? For Ash, it had been years since he'd last seen Lance. While he, Brock, May, and Max were in Hoenn, he remembered. So not that long ago, in this timeline. It was hard to wrap his head around that. It was Kid who got the idea first, said Brock, and Ash turned to stare at him, surprised. Brock continued. She knows Lance, through work. Whatever that means, and after she learned that we knew him already, she suggested we'd call him. Luckily, I had time to change course and find them in Rhoda, added Lance. The G-men have been tailing Hunter J and others like her for years, now. It's not often we get as solid a lead as this one. How? Asked Ash haltingly. How'd you find me? Well, said Lance, and smiled slyly. I have friends in odd places. And luckily one of them happened to run into you. He looked over Ash's shoulder, and Ash turned to stare at Kellen. You know Lance, too? Kellen shrugged, and chuckled. I was more surprised to learn that you know Lance. What are the odds? But I suppose it does explain a few things. When I heard from Brock, I put out an alert to all of the G-men and the Rangers I know personally. Lance explained. I told them that Jay has been seen in Kanto, and to look out for a lone kid, possibly traveling with a Lucario, and who may or may not be injured. Kellen immediately responded that he had seen someone like that, but that he's in Sinnoh. Ash rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, I guess I spent a while in Jay's plane before I got out. And how, exactly, did you get out? Asked Brock, in the voice he sometimes got when Ash had done something exceptionally stupid and reckless. What happened to your arm? Ash put his hand over the bandages that peeped from under the sleeve of the hoodie, wincing when even the softest of touches aggravated the steady pulse of pain into something fiery. Don't worry about all that, he said quickly. We got away, and that's what matters, right? Sure, yeah, of course, said Brock, though he looked skeptical. What about Mew? Did you find it? Ash shook his head remorsefully. No, it wasn't held in the same place with Lucario. I dunno where she's put it. I'm sorry. That's all right, said Lance. That's why I'm here. Ash nodded quietly. Thanks. Anyway, said Brock, Kid had to go meet her boss, make sure they are still okay after getting compromised like that by Jay. Lance picked us up at Rhoda and now we're on our way to you. On your way? Asked Ash. They certainly weren't walking or riding on Pokemon, so the statement seemed odd. Lance has got this awesome aircraft, said Max. Super cool, state-of-the-art kinda thing. We'll be there before you know it. It even has its own jacuzzi, said May, shifting her hold of Pikachu. Can you believe it? Lance said we can take a bath once we land. Awesome, said Ash, but he couldn't stop looking at Pikachu. Now, he thought about the device they had hidden behind the Poke Center, the pure agony they had gone through just to hold on to it, and thought, soon. I really miss you guys, he said then. His voice was small, cracked, and the atmosphere changed instantly. His friends behind the screen got really serious, and Kellen put a careful hand on his shoulder, leaning over to look at him. Just hold on a little longer, buddy, he said gently. Once Lance gets here, he'll take over the operation and you and your friends can rest. You won't have to worry about a thing anymore. We got the best men on the job. I promise we'll catch Jay and save Mew for you. Ash nodded, before stilling. Wait, what do you mean we don't gotta worry anymore? You mean, we're not gonna be part of the operation? Kellen raised his brow in disbelief. Of course not, he said. You're civilians. Even more, you're just kids. This is a dangerous operation, Ash. You should stay as far away from it as you can. Oh, it's this again, thought Ash. It'd probably be useless to argue. Damn the operation. They would just have to do their own thing, then. As usual. As if sensing his thoughts, Lance said, we'll talk about this when we get there. Kellen, keep your eyes on him. Ash. He stared at Ash, pointedly, until Ash felt like his soul was being searched. Don't do anything rash. Wait for us, okay? Reluctantly, Ash said, okay. See you soon. See you soon, his friends called, and they disconnected the line. Kellen pushed on his shoulder, guiding him towards one of the booths. How about you sit down for the time being? I need to speak to Abby about something. Ash let him settle him into the booth, where his hot chocolate from breakfast was now sitting cold and half-drank. He slumped against the cushions, feeling drained. Lucario shuffled into the opposite sofa and took his hand into its paw in silent support. Who's Abby? Asked Ash quietly, when Kellen didn't immediately leave. The ranger smiled, glancing over his shoulder towards the front desk. Oh, right. Abby's a good friend of mine. Abigail Joy is her name. You might know her as Nurse Joy. Ash blinked dazedly. Nurse Joy's first name is Abigail? Funny, right? Said Kellen. He grinned with deep-seated affection. You might meet a few dozen Nurse Joys in your life, and never learn any of their first names. Most of the Joys are very private people. It's a family thing, I suppose. But I have known Abby since I was just starting out as a ranger, and she is a nurse. I saved her from an angry pack of Houndour and Houndoom, and we've been friends ever since. That's cool, said Ash. He felt stupid for never bothering to ask any of the Nurse Joy's names. He found himself wondering if Officer Jenny's family was the same. Now that he thought about it, they couldn't all be called Jenny, right? Oh, it is, said Kellen. He slapped Ash on the knee and waved his hand vaguely. Anyways, I'm off to talk to her now. You rest up here and wait for me, yeah? Yeah, all right, said Ash. He leaned his head back against the cushions, closed his eyes and smiled to himself. His friends were okay, and they were coming for him. And soon, he would be able to hold Pikachu again. The things that alerted him to trouble were first the spike of alarm in Lucario's aura, and then an unfamiliar voice approaching their table. Hey dude, that your Lucario? Ash cracked his eyes open and was met with a face he could only describe as sharp. Sharp cheekbones over a pointy jaw, straight as ruler nose, and small, clever eyes. The guy was older than him, possibly even close to Kellen's age. And he was staring at Ash, hands on his narrow hips. What? Said Ash, taken off guard and still half asleep. I asked you, said the guy with frustrating bossiness, if that Lucario is yours? He nodded towards Lucario, who was eyeing the newcomer with great suspicion. No, said Ash, still confused about the whole thing. Who was this guy, now? Lucario's my friend. We're traveling together. Well, that's good, said the guy, scratching the side of his incredibly pointy nose. I would like to catch it. What? Said Ash, sitting up straighter. He stared at the guy, not believing his ears. Why? Why? Asked Pointy Nose. What do you mean, why? Why not? I know a thing or two about Lucario, and this one is most definitely strong. So, I would like to have it for myself. Well, you can't, said Ash intelligently. He scooted himself out of the booth, hitting his knee against the table and jostling his bad arm in the process. He grimaced, holding his arm gingerly, and attempted to stand confidently in front of the guy. It's not my decision anyway. Lucario can well decide for itself who it wants to travel with. Pointy Nose looked quite amused by his efforts, and he stepped easily past him, approaching Lucario. Lucario will decide. He smirked. That's cute. You do know these things have nothing to do with the Pokémon, and everything to do with the trainer, right? You're wrong, said Ash, hurrying to plant himself between the booth and the guy. He was at least a head taller than Ash, but he was kinda skinny, so Ash, though he might be able to take him on. Pointy Nose was laughing now. And how am I wrong? Have you got any Pokemon of your own, Shorty? Or are you waiting for them to choose you? Most of them did, said Ash plainly. He glanced back at Lucario, who shook its head minutely. Then, he stared down the guy. I think you should go now. I think you should move aside, Pointy Nose replied, and his hand reached out to push Ash to the side. Ash felt Lucario grabbing his shoulder from behind, and he raised his hand in defense, his palm against the guy's. Energy surged through his arm and the air between their hands crackled with intense heat, and Ash blinked his eyes against the blinding flash of blue light. Pointy Nose was yelling, and when Ash opened his eyes again, the guy was halfway across the room, holding his hand against his chest, his eyes big and scared and fixed at Ash. What was that? He stammered, backing off still. Who are you? Ash's body was thrumming with tingling warmth. He glanced around, heart pounding. Thankfully, the room was empty besides him and Pointy Nose. And Kellen, he noted, who was now striding across the room with a determined sort of scowl on his face. Come with me, the ranger said, planting his hand against Ash's back and pushing him not so gently towards the door of the back room. Now. Ash went, and Lucario ran after them, confusion and smugness equally coloring their aura. Kellen made him sit down onto a soft bench in the back room, and Nurse Joy, Abigail, thought Ash, fussed over his bandages while Kellen went back to the lobby to talk to Pointy Nose. He came back 5 minutes later, his mouth a thin line. You can use aura? He asked, standing in front of Ash with crossed arms. Well, said Ash. Not really. I mean, kinda. Lucario said I have a similar aura to Sir Aaron. And when I touch a time flower it activates. And sometimes, I guess, when Lucario helps, I can do other stuff, too. Kellen stared at him. You know that's an incredibly rare skill? Humans even sensitive to aura are almost non-existent. Having any ability to control it is as good as a myth. I know, said Ash, slowly getting worked up by the topic. That's why I never tell anyone about it. It's way easier that way. How long have you known? Asked Kellen curiously. A few years, said Ash. I never learned to use it, though. The things like what happened with Pointy Nose back there have only happened while Lucario is with me. I guess it helps me to kinda build it up and form it into something more real. Pointy Nose? Asked Kellen, before shaking his head. Whatever. That's incredible, Ash. No wonder you and Lucario seem to have this invisible connection between you. It's because you do. I guess so, said Ash slowly, and turned to look at Lucario. The Pokemon was watching him silently, something complex clouding its gaze. When we saw each other for the first time, Lucario mistook me for Sir Aaron. But, I'm not him. I could never be him. I do not see you as Aaron, anymore, said Lucario, and from the corner of his eye Ash could see Kellen flinching, startled by the telepathy. You are your own person, Ash. But you are strong, not unlike the way Aaron was. Thanks, Lucario, mumbled Ash, but I dunno about that. I sure don't feel that strong right now. Everything you have done for me, said Lucario. I am very thankful. To you, too, Mr. Kellen. Kellen jumped. Oh, he stammered, speechless for once. Well, thank you, Lucario. It's been my pleasure. Lucario bowed its head towards Abigail. And you, Miss Joy. The healing you gave me, in this Pokemon Center, it was something I've never experienced before. I felt fully restored after just one night of sleep. Sincerely, thank you. Abigail blushed, grinning. Oh, no, I was just doing my job. You are most excellent in your work, miss. Damn right, said Kellen emphatically, and Abigail slapped him on the arm in mock offense. Watch it, mister. Kellen yelped theatrically. Ouch, Abby. He rubbed his arm, pouting. How violent. Maybe it was one of your sisters who took care of Lucario, after all. Ooh, I'll show you violent, said Abigail, attacking Kellen with ruthless tickles, and Kellen screamed, folding almost in two as he tried to shuffle away to escape. Ash leaned his head back and laughed, genuinely and heartily, for what felt like the first time in a very long time. Kellen and Abigail joined him, and after a few seconds of hesitation, so did Lucario. Somehow, between all the moments of hurt and confusion and danger, they had found this moment for themselves. A moment of true friendship, pure and honest and full of healing energy, and Ash felt it filling him up, slowly restoring something deep within him he'd thought might have been already lost for good. To be continued. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know your thoughts and reviews in the comment box. Now I will see you in the next video.